What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Hello, hello, hello. Shout out to the people out there in the world. Shout out to my subs that are going to see this in real time or in the playback. So, I have a real special stream for y'all. I think real carefully about the different streams that I put out there. But the thing about it is, there's certain things, certain information that a lot of content creators do. It's more so the run of the mill information that needs to be put out if you're going to be a content creator in this. What's going on, Coach Steele? There's certain content that everyone puts out in the space. It's almost expected that they should put it out. But this one is a type of stream that a lot of content creators, for a bunch of different reasons, they either won't do it, they can't do it, they choose not to do it. So this stream is going to talk about the history of the manosphere, and eventually we're going to work our way up to the modern times of Kevin Samuels and Fresh and Fit. Now, when it comes to these topics, the problem is every person, let's say there's been 10, 20 people that want to do this stream, and they've been around the manosphere for a long period of time. Each person is going to realistically have a little bit of bias. So you guys see the talking points I'm about to cover in the blue banner. You see 1 all the way through 8, okay? So everyone's going to be a little bit biased. Now, my thing is, I tried my hardest to take the bias out of it and to sit here and logically break this down in a fair-minded way, because the history of the manosphere is real important. So here's the thing. There's a difference between talking about women versus talking to women. And you guys keep that in mind as we move forward through the stream. Because, and then there's a difference between people that could realistically said to be in the manosphere in a more formal way versus guys or women that are in the peripherals, whether in the past or now, that it isn't too fair to put them in the manosphere, whether it was then or now. Now, they might have been saying stuff that was manosphere-esque. It sounded like something that manosphere content creators say in modern times or in the past. But if they never really claimed the space and they didn't really sit there and go through a bunch of problems that the actual content creators in the manosphere went through, it's really hard for them to, in a legit way, claim the space. Now, the other thing about it is, and this is a talking point that it's real complicated, because there's some people that would agree with it. There's other people that won't. Myself, I'm kind of in the middle. There's some people that say if someone hasn't actually written a book that's been well respected by the community and by a bunch of different people, even outside the community, then these type of people shouldn't really be taken seriously in the manosphere. There's just certain guys, they don't want to write books, even if they're well read and even if they can have the ability to do it. They just don't care to do it. Now, it's up to the audience, it's up to the people out there to decide if that's something that makes a content creator legitimate. So what you see on the banner is a real complicated list of people. Now, the thing is, obviously, because it's a banner and it kind of ruins the surprise of the stream, I wasn't going to sit there and put all the names of the different people. Now, yes, there's some names up there, but you notice on the different points, every single point doesn't have a name attached to it. That's what you should see. When you look at the screen, that's what you should notice. So let's start off with number one. Now, some people would say that these two guys, that it isn't really fair to put them as number one, because in terms of the radio host, that would be Tom Likas. That's who I'm referring to in terms of the late 1990s. In terms of comedy, Patrice O'Neal. So Tom Likas is a white male. Patrice O'Neal, who passed away, Mr. O'Neal, the gentleman was black. And historically, the manosphere has been generally associated with those two races. Now, it doesn't mean there's not people of other races that are within the manosphere, but in terms of actually developing it and founding it and massaging the history of it to get it to where it is now, it's generally understood, and most people in a fair-minded way would agree that it has to do with those two races. Now, like a lot of people that have known me for a long period of time, some of the people that know me in real life, they know I'm not either one. I'm Latino. So my ethnic group is Mexican and my race is Latino. Now, if I was doing a stream about race and we were to talk about race, a lot of people would say, well, Latino or Hispanic, that's not a race. It's a subset of the white race. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that for a bunch of different reasons, but we're not going to get into that today. I'm just speaking a little bit of sidebar before you really get into the stream. Now, when it comes to hello, shout out to the new persons that came into the stream. Shout out. So right now we're about to review the history of the manosphere, and we're going to talk about how Kevin Samuels essentially quote unquote tricked, for all these different women to come into the space. So we're going to cover that. That's going to be the overall argument. So you guys that are reading the stream, the title, that's going to be essentially an argument. I'm going to talk about how Kevin Samuels essentially quote unquote tricked, for women to get in the manosphere. We're going to lead up to that. That's going to be the end of the stream. So, okay, so the radio, Tom Likas, the comedy side, Mr. O'Neal. Now, prior to that, guys, those two gentlemen, there was a guy by the name of Ross Jeffries in the early 1990s that a lot of people associate as being more or less the godfather of pickup artists. But I didn't include him in the first stage for a reason, for a bunch of different reasons. Because here's the thing. Just because someone was the quote unquote first person to do something, it doesn't mean they're the most famous people for having done it. It doesn't mean, so if you were to sit there and talk to a bunch of people that have been in the manosphere for a long period of time, if you were to talk to a bunch of the content creators, they would be more familiar with Tom Likas and Patrice O'Neal. So Patrice O'Neal, he used to do a bunch of stand-up comedy in a bunch of different venues all over the country. Now, when he was doing this, it was roundabouts of the late 1990s. When it comes to Tom Likas, when he started doing this segment on this show, he used to talk to women that would call into his show. Now, here's the catch. Tom Likas, and you guys can look it up, but there was an infamous situation where a female called into his show and basically confessed to committing a murder. Now, a lot of the people at the radio station, they couldn't believe what they were hearing. They thought she was trolling. They thought she was just like joking. Later on, they found out that actually is what happened. So you got to think about it. And I talked about this in the past, about 2 weeks ago. If you're someone like Tom Likas and you've been through those type of situations, and you've been someone that's been high profile for a long period of time, during that time period, you have people doing death threats. You have people that won't leave you alone in public. You go through all these problems because you're a radio host of a big station and you're worth millions of dollars. Now, you guys think about what the issue with that is. You're going to have an issue if people in the future don't give you your due credit for having contributed to the space. Now, later on, we're going to talk about Tommy Sotomayor. The problem with some of these people is they've kind of claimed the space when it was convenient and where it was going to benefit them. But if things were getting real difficult and the heat was really, the heat was really rising in the oven, they would kind of distance themselves from the space. Okay. So later on, Tom Leykis, what happened with him is when Kevin Samuels passed away, Tom Leykis made a comment that was really ridiculous and really cruel. He basically said, "That's what you get for stealing my stuff." So basically what Tom Leykis was saying, okay, because you were influenced or paraphrased or flat out repeated my own talking points, it's almost like he was wishing and he was happy that he died. Okay? If you can go look it up. It's on Twitter. Now, like I was saying, there'd be these different women that would call into his show, his more famous segment, because, you know, like on the radio back in the days, you guys that are younger, the radio isn't as much of a thing. There's some people that still listen to it, but it just isn't. Because if you're listening to this stuff on YouTube, it isn't radio anymore. It's just not called that. It might be called a podcast. It might be called a stream. It might be called a bunch of different things, but it's not called the radio. But back in the day, that's exactly what he was doing. So Tom Leykis, he was doing the radio format in a bunch of different cities, a bunch of different places all over the United States. And he eventually started that segment where women would call in. So there would be a bunch of different things that he would talk about. Sometimes there would be some single moms that would call in and he would shame them. A lot of times he was teaching men how to avoid gold diggers. One of his more famous pieces of advice, which it isn't that, my thing is I've always kind of followed it on my own. And I can say, in all honesty, I'd never heard of that talking point during the time period I started doing it. But what he talked about is that you shouldn't spend more than a certain dollar amount on women in terms of dates. So he basically advised guys out there to spend no more than about 40 to 50 bucks on dates. That's always what I've naturally done over the long period of time. Because if you sit there and you think about it, all right, so if you're spending $6 times 6 drinks, 3 drinks each, that's $36. And then you have the tip, right? $7, $8. So now you're at $43, $44. So you sit there and you think, okay, it starts making logical sense. So that's the thing about Tom Leykis. If you're over here giving men advice on women and you're critiquing women's behavior, even though the phrase female nature was not in the lexicon during that time period, it was essentially what he was doing. Okay? He was almost like a weird mix of a dating coach and a traditional red pill content creator. So he would talk about a bunch of the different concepts. Now, it doesn't mean he was sitting there using formal words for the concepts that he talked about, but he was essentially over there talking about that stuff. So it doesn't really matter if the topic that he was talking about was hypergamy. He just happened to be talking about it in a roundabout way and it didn't have a title. Okay. So it'd be like, okay, it's information in a math book. The math book just didn't have a title to it. So that's what he would do. He would give advice to men and he would critique women's behavior in a bunch of different ways. Like, why are you treating men this way? Why are you just always operating out of self-interest? Whether that's true or not, I'm not saying that's true. That's a conversation for another day. Okay, we're just trying to objectively talk about the history of the space. I'm not trying to sit there and be biased. So I'm just explaining what Tom Likas would do. Now, when it comes to the black side, Mr. O'Neill, over time during the late 90s, and you know how it goes with comedians. A lot of you guys understand how it goes with comedians. So they start off small. They got to prove themselves in the underground circuit. They got to really go out there and develop their skills, develop their jokes, fine tune them. And then eventually they get signed to maybe a movie corporation, right, for a film, or they stay on the comedy side of it, more of a one-on-one basis. So during this time period, he was developing his different jokes, his philosophy, his little skits, his whole how he would go about delivering the jokes. Because I saw Eddie Griffin. I highly recommend you guys go see him. He's a good comedian. I recommend you guys go see him. He's a real funny dude. So when it comes to this, O'Neill gets a lot of credit from a lot of people in the Black Manosphere as essentially being one of the first guys, if not the first guy, that really helped establish the space. Now, the guy passed away. The space, for all intention purposes, didn't really exist. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But it essentially didn't exist. It wasn't like he was claiming the space, right? Because remember, I was talking about when he was really beginning to hit his strides, which, if you look it up, it was about the late 1990s. The same time, it just so happened to be the same time as Tom Likas. So it was around the late 1990s, okay? So the same thing as Tom Likas. He would talk about a bunch of different stuff of female nature. He wasn't calling it female nature, but that's essentially what he was doing. So he would talk about the different aspects of what would benefit men. Okay, if you're going to take women on dates, don't sit there and let her use you as an emotional tampon. And we're about to get to Alan Roger Curry. Don't let her use you for the possibility of sex. That's Alan Roger Curry's talking point. Don't spend too much money on her, right? Don't go over the top and spending money on her. He would sit there and critique women's behavior just like Tom Likas. Now, you got to think about it from this perspective. See, if you're a guy that's a comedian, you're going to be able to get away with more types of comments and jokes because a lot of people are just going to see that as part of the routine. They're like, okay, well, he's a comedian. Don't really take what he is saying seriously. So you see how it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of there's a bunch of people that only really consider someone as being legit if they've actually written some books. So one of these guys was a radio host. The other guy was a comedian. Okay? If you talk to a bunch of people in the Black Manosphere, they would credit O'Neill as being a huge influence upon them. Okay? Now, let's talk about talking point number 2. So, for you guys outside the space that will listen to this stream, there's a gentleman by the name of Alan Roger Curry that passed away recently. So, during the late 1990s, he did 2 things, okay? So, his famous direct approach, Mode 1, his first book, the first edition, was written and cranked out in May of 1999. Also, during the late 1990s, he was doing Blog Talk Radio. He would talk to different guests some of the times, and they would have conversations about dating. Now, let's think about this. This is where things start getting a little complicated. Let me explain something to a lot of people out there that are not too familiar with the manosphere. A lot of dating coaches, and sometimes I agree with what they do. What they do is they try real hard to not be associated with the manosphere, the different pills, the red pill, the black pill, especially the black pill, and even the blue pill, because a lot of dating coaches, they don't want to admit that looks matters a bunch to women. Now, in terms of the different people in the manosphere, it's a matter of debate what percentage people think looks matters to women. 70%, 80%, 90%, 10%, 20%, 50%. So a lot of dating coaches, they have traditionally gone out of their way to try to avoid talking about looks. Now, one of the content creators I highly respect is this guy by the name of Obsidian. He's one of the 3 founders of the Black Manosphere when it was more formally established. So himself, Angry Man, and then O'Shea Duke Jackson. One thing he said the other day was really interesting. Now, before I say what he said, he used to write articles for Roosh V, which was the owner of the website returnofkings.com. It's basically defunct. You might be able to read some articles, but there's not articles and stuff being produced right now or towards the future. They're unlikely to be produced in the future unless he sold the website or did something like that. But the last time I checked, there's not new material getting reduced or released on the website. Okay, so the thing about Return of Kings, we're going to talk about that here on point number 4. But what Obsidian said was really interesting, because he's been around the manosphere for a long period of time. So he's very intelligent and he's real methodical in his thought process. And he was around a bunch of PUAs. So I highly respect what he has to say on the topic. Now, what Obsidian said was really interesting. He said, well, I've basically close to never heard a dating coach or a PUA say that looks don't matter. Okay? But here's the problem with that logic. Yes, it might be true that most of these different content creators, that they've never said straight up that looks don't matter. But think about it from this way. What you're essentially implying is, if you're not talking about looks at all in your content, and you don't have some videos that really focus on the concept in any real way, what you're basically saying in an indirect way is that you think looks don't matter to women, that you're able to surpass all the different aspects of female nature when it comes to the concept of men's looks and sexual attraction, looks being a part of sexual attraction. That's essentially what you're implying. Now, what I just said is complicated, so think about it carefully on what I was talking about. Okay? Now, like I was talking about, dating coaches have tried to always stay away from having to claim the different pills, because in their eyes, it's bad for business. going on? What's going on? What's going on? So a lot of dating coaches, they have tried to traditionally stay away from being grouped with the different pills. And for you guys, and I can't assume everyone's in the manosphere, so I got to talk about this. When it comes to the black pill, a lot of people, a lot of guys out there, a lot of content creators, and there's still some debate. The black pill is still formulating in terms of developing the philosophy amongst the content creators. There's still some fighting back and forth in terms of the core philosophy of the black pill. And that's always going to be true for all the different pills and the different subsectors of the manosphere. But some of those guys, if you were to talk to them, they would say the black pill is almost essentially just focused on looks. That looks is a primary factor that women look at. Some of them take it to an extreme level, saying it's 90%, 100% in how a woman chooses a man. That's what they think. I'm not saying I think that. I'm saying what they think. Other black pillars, and this is where the things get complicated. There's a difference between what a guy claims and what he's willing to say that he believes versus how the outside world perceives the different sectors of the manosphere. Because the reality and the thing that's more or less true is a lot of people from the outside world, they're not a big fan of the black pill. They think that's basically one of the worst, if not the worst, part of the manosphere. Because some of those guys, and it goes back to what they claim to believe versus what other people perceive it to be on the outside world. A lot of people from the outside world thinks that they're real doom and gloom, and they're those type of people that are severe outcasts in society, and they associate a bunch of dumb stuff happening throughout America with those dudes, if you know what I mean, quote unquote dumb stuff, bad stuff. But if you were to talk to these guys in the manosphere, they wouldn't say that. Well, we're not doom and gloom. We're just realistic. They would say things of that nature. So there's a lot of people, a lot of dating coaches, the vast majority of dating coaches of any kind of name, 95, 99% of them that would stay away from being grouped into the black pill. Now, this is where things get complicated. Wheat Waffles is essentially a guy in that sector. And like a lot of different dudes, there's a lot of different dudes. What they try to do is, and I'm kind of like this as well, but I think I have more of a reason to do it versus other content creators. A lot of content creators, they do whatever it takes to try to talk about themselves as a special brand that isn't in any real sector of the manosphere, that they're just a special sauce. You know, one of those sauces. If you guys, I don't know if you guys have this restaurant, this drive-through fast food restaurants called Cane's. They're infamous for their sauce. If you were to talk to anyone that's ate there, everyone knows what they're famous for, which is their sauce, right? The sauce for the fries and for the burger or whatever. That's just what they're famous for. Sometimes that's true of content creators, but for other ones, it just isn't true. If you sit there and review their videos and their philosophy, they fit pretty squarely in one of these sectors. Okay? So Wheat Waffles, I would put them as a black pillar. Now, here's where things get complicated. If you're sitting there and you're rating guys' faces and you're telling guys you need to sit there and really work out a bunch to develop your jawline and all these different things, you know what he's essentially doing? Let me explain what he's essentially doing. He's essentially being a dating coach in a roundabout way. He has a vicious focus on looks, height, anything related to attraction. So he's telling men, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this to get better success with women. So that's essentially what he is. Now, it doesn't really matter if he claims the label or not, but that's what he is. So this part of the stream is really important. as I go back to number 2. So we're on point number 2. Alan Roger Curry. So you notice on the years, if you notice on the breakdown of the years, how I lined up the talking points, and I started off from the late 90s, and then I'm working my way up to the current time period, which is 2020 with KS and Fresh and Fit. So remember, if you consider a content creator, if you only consider content creators legit if they have written a book, well, straight off the jump, you got to knock off a bunch of content creators off the list. But this doesn't apply to Alan Roger Curry because he released Mode 1. He released Mode 1, his first official copy, his first edition, in May of 1999. He started doing blog talk radio roundabouts in 1997. There would be different conversations with women and different people about dating. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Like I said, a lot of dating coaches, they don't want to be associated with the different pills for different reasons. But if you sit there and you really start grilling them and you really start breaking down their philosophy, things start falling apart. So you're sitting there and you're like, okay, well, aren't you the guy that tells guys they need to be the leader and they need to self-improve and they need to sit there and have a real good defined body? What are you telling men? Think about what I just said. What you're telling men is you essentially have to be better than women in order to get success with women. So if you keep following that line of logic, we basically get to a major principle of the red pill, which is hypergamy. If you're telling a guy, okay, you're going to be on your purpose, you're going to self-improve, all these different things, you need to get a good career, you need to start a business, you're basically telling a guy, okay, in order to get a decent woman, you're going to have to be real successful, however you want to define it. Now, they might not call their information red pill, but it is essentially red pill. Now, like I said, a lot of content creators, they've tried to avoid being boxed in with pills and being boxed in with the manosphere because they want to try to say they're a special brand. They're not like those other guys. They have the special sauce. Someone that I would give some credit to possibly being able to not claim the manosphere and it being legit would be the Saint in the Center, because the guy has done some real interesting streams on just a bunch of off the wall type things. He's talked about religion. He's talked about politics, geopolitics. He's talked about a bunch of different things that are just not anywhere close to being manosphere related. Now, other content creators, if they try to do it, some of them would be able to pull it off, but some of them don't even try it because they don't want to lose their core audience. The point is, saying the Center, I think, rightfully can hold that claim. But here's the other problem when it comes to this information. Like I was saying earlier, a lot of guys, especially in the past, they didn't want to claim the manosphere, even if damn near all their content, most of their content was manosphere type content, traditional of what's traditionally been considered manosphere, because the manosphere was a real dangerous thing to claim in the past. You could get fired from your job. You could get banned off YouTube. Your books could get banned on Amazon, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Minister Jap, he's talked about this before. He said that women found out where he worked and they got him fired from his job. So he has talked about that. He has talked about that in his streams. So you see how that starts developing. Now, when it comes to Alan Roger Curry, this is where things get really interesting, because he has essentially jumped in and out of the manosphere during different time periods. When he was alive, he now passed away. So sometimes when things were going real negative and there was a bunch of negative press around the industry, he'd be like, well, I'm not a part of those guys. Don't group me with those guys. And then other times he would say, he's a real complicated case study, because he would always say that he got more respect from the white manosphere versus the black manosphere. And I'm going to talk about that some other day. That's not going to be a topic for today. But he has spoke at a bunch of different places alongside for the white manosphere. Okay. So he was the guest of honor, one of the speakers for the convention that Anthony the Dream Johnson has held. Okay. The president, so-called president of the white manosphere. You guys don't know what I'm talking about in terms of their history? Well, look it up. Okay, so you guys keep that in mind in terms of Alan Roger Curry, of what's going on right there. Now, let's move on to the next one. Number 3. Now, you notice, okay, see, the thing is, as the audience, you can't assume that just because someone was active for a year or two, that he's always going to be active for 10 years or 20 years or whatever as part of a movement. He could retire, pass away, doing something different. But in terms of Alan Roger Curry was pretty much in and around the space for over 20 years. So when he claims that he was a part, remember, like I said, Alan Roger Curry would bounce in and out of the manosphere for different reasons. He would, towards the later part of his life, especially after Kevin Samuels and all these different men, Fresh and Fit and manosphere related content became a little bit more acceptable to be talked about amongst friends and around society, that type of stuff, even at work, which I don't recommend talking to people about the manosphere content at work. I'm just saying some people do it. But if you go find some of the different websites and some of the different biographies that Alan Roger Curry wrote about himself, what you would find is that he put himself as part of, oh, you're good. Shout out to everyone. Thank you for coming by. We're going in. We're talking about the history of the manosphere, and we're going to talk to eventually to the talking point that how Kevin was able to get women, quote unquote, trick women to get in the manosphere. So you notice Alan Roger Curry, he's well in the middle of Manosphere 1.0. It's generally, by a lot of people, and obviously, if you were to go read different history books on different time periods of American history, and you were to read the same event from different authors, most of it would align, but there would be some different interpretations. A good analogy, a good discussion point is the thing that's taught in American classrooms is when it comes to the Vietnam War, let's say this. All right, first of all, a lot of his history teachers, they don't like to teach that. They don't like to teach that in high school. I learned about it in college. Now, obviously, I could have picked up a book and learned about it on my own, but I first really and truly learned about it in college. Now, you got to think about why a lot of history teachers would not want to talk about it here in the United States. Well, because we lost the war, and there was a bunch of bad things associated with that time period. Okay? But if you were to sit there and you were to look it up, we call it the Vietnam War. If you sit there and you were to fly to Vietnam, and you were to pick up one of their books, what you would see is that they call it a different name. And that makes sense because some of the information is essentially propaganda. Doesn't mean that we do that a bunch in the United States, but at the end of the day, the teachers and the professors are going to have some bias. As much as they should not be biased, some of them are just going to realistically have some bias. Now, in other parts of the world, they're ordered by the governments, all the different teachers and professors, to essentially lie to the public, to the kids, and for them to basically get inaccurate information that pretty much makes the country look good, almost no matter the conflict, no matter what happened, right? So that little virus that started over there in China, the little jab, if you know what I mean, I bet you if you go to China, if you were to go to China in 10 years and you were to read about it in one of their books, it would be a bunch of garbage that wouldn't make any kind of sense, that the rest of the world would not agree with. Propaganda, because they're known, right? It's a communist country. So they're not going to sit there and really criticize their own. In certain parts of the world, if you have certain kinds of books, you're going to get your head chopped off. You can't go to certain websites. They're banned in a bunch of different countries. Right? Same thing with this talking point and this discussion, the same type of analogy. But in general, Manosphere 1.0 was from around 1998 to about 2004. There might be some disagreement here and there, maybe a year or two, but there shouldn't be a big gap if you talk to other people. Now, here's the thing about Manosphere 1.0. This was a time period where things were really vicious towards content creators. A lot of women were doing whatever it took to get the different content creators banned from YouTube, and they were real successful in doing it. A lot of women and some men, there's some men that would do it as well. They would sit there and get guys fired from different jobs. A lot of the content creators back then, and it applies to some people nowadays, but especially back then, a lot of people, they didn't cam up. They were just having these discussions behind an avatar. Now, the thing a lot of people are going to say in the future when they watch the stream, well, what about you? You're behind an avatar. You're not cammed up. So what's the difference? There is a difference. The difference is all you got to do is click on a bunch of my videos, a couple of my videos, and you'll see that I'm cammed up, and I don't know, 70% of them, 90% of them. So if you want to know what I look like, you just go to one of the other videos. For the sake of these live streams, these type of live streams, for the most part, you're going to be seeing my avatar. Now, in the future, it's going to be a little bit more complicated because I'm going to start doing more complicated streams, more complicated backgrounds, and I'm going to be cammed up. But for the purposes of the streams that are coming for the next couple months, I'm going to be right here with the avatar. Okay? So during that time period, in a real way, in a more formal way, the Manosphere started developing. Now, you guys that just came in, you guys, after the stream, y'all listen to the playback, and you guys can follow the logic. You guys understand, and y'all see the banner where you're working up to Kevin Samuels. So we start off in the late 1990s, and we're eventually going to get to this time period. So to really understand the whole logic of what I'm saying, you got to review the whole stream. So like I was saying earlier, just a real summarization of those points earlier before we talk about point number 3 some more. Just because all these different people, like the comedians and the radio host Tom Likas, just because they weren't claiming Manosphere, just because it wasn't quote unquote officially started, it doesn't really mean that they weren't essentially using the same talking points. A lot of them were. They were using a bunch of the same talking points. They were analyzing female nature, even if they didn't use the phrase female nature. And it's a phrase at Obsidian, and I've never really talked to him about it. I want to really talk to him about it behind the scenes, because I've always wanted to know why he doesn't like the phrase. But Obsidian, a major content creator over there in the Black Manosphere, he doesn't like the phrase. He doesn't like the phrase for some reason. But like I was saying, all these different guys in the late 1990s, a lot of them who didn't write books, a lot of them who never ever claimed the space, even if they're still living during this time period where things popped off, a lot of people wouldn't consider them Manosphere because they never wrote official books. They never claimed the space, and they never got involved in what's the current times of what's going on. It's just like basketball in the NBA. Okay, so if you're one of those guys that's a street basketball player in Harlem and you're really really good, and you go around telling people that you're better than NBA players, they're gonna laugh in your face. They're gonna say, "Well, if you're so good, why aren't you in the NBA?" You see how that works? If you're an NBA player, Kevin Durant, doesn't really matter. Forget about the stars. If you're on the bench, if you're a bench player, there's still women throwing themselves at you because they want to get pregnant by you and they want to get in your pockets. It's not the same thing. The NBA is considered the top tier, the highest level of basketball. There's levels to it. There's a difference between being officially recognized and having that reputation as being a part of a group that's considered the top tier, the top dogs, versus kind of doing that on the side and not really being recognized as being a part of that top tier group. So when it comes to Manosphere 1.0, talking point number 3, there's some people, especially on the Black Manosphere side, that wouldn't consider it. They wouldn't consider it as part of the official start of the Manosphere. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. Okay? So you guys keep it in mind. And like I was saying earlier, most people, they have traditionally talked about the Manosphere in terms of the two major wings that most people agree with, if they're being in good faith, including myself, is that there's been the Black Manosphere and then the White Manosphere. Now, the discussions of all these different reasons why the Black Manosphere separated. So it's all right. So this is the way it went. So it was basically the White Manosphere, and there was Black content creators that happened to be part of that little gang. Y'all see how that works? Now, there's a difference. There's some debate amongst some content creators. It's one of those things where there'll be people that there'll be revisionist history out of self-interest or because they don't want to look bad. But in general, a lot of Black Manosphere content creators, which is 2.0, they basically said, okay, we didn't get quote unquote kicked out of the White Manosphere. We decided to take off and go focus on the Black Manosphere and really develop it and really focus on the issues of the Black community. In other words, just because this stuff about female nature and all these different things, hypergamy in the white community doesn't necessarily work in the same way as the Black community. And like you guys know, I'm Latino. So that stuff doesn't necessarily apply in the same way in my community. So if you guys were to type it, so I'll give y'all a little homework assignment. So if you were to go to Google and you were to translate hypergamy into Spanish, and you were to go to a place on YouTube where you could put it as a hashtag, and it would tell you how many different times it comes up in results and that type of stuff, compared to the word hypergamy in English, you would see just a ridiculous difference in the numbers. Hypergamy in Spanish, the number of times it's in the search results, it's really, really low. Now, you got to sit there and think about that in a logical perspective. Well, I mean, there's Europe, there's the United States, there's Canada, Australia, a bunch of the parts of the world that are English speaking, a lot of the parts of the world that are first world versus more third world and emerging economies. Brazil, let's talk about the emerging economies real quick, because that's part of the Passport Bros discussion, but let's do a little sidebar. See, a lot of times when there's these women talking trash about Passport Bros, they're talking about how these guys are going over to other parts of the country to deal with quote unquote 30-foot women and all this trash. Brazil isn't a third world country. It's an emerging economy. So in terms of emerging economy, what it basically means is it's in the middle, basically in the middle of first world and a third world country. So there's this acronym that economists use. It's BRIC. So BRIC. So Brazil, Russia, India, and China are considered part of the emerging economies. Now, if a lot of people from the first world, if they were to go to a lot of those different countries, they wouldn't be impressed, and they would be like, I don't know if I can agree with these economists. They would say a bunch of different things. But at the end of the day, the logic stands. The logic makes sense. Okay, there's something that's really exceptional, and then there's something that's kind of in the middle, which is average, and then there's something that's really, really bad. It's just like if you go to the grocery store, it's a similar logic. You go get a sit there. You go to get I don't know, a can of soup. There's going to be the off brands and the good brands and the average brands. Same logic. So you see how that works? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I agree more so with the history of black men branching off to develop their own manosphere in a more formal way. Okay? I think that's more fair to say. That's more logical. When it comes to these different, when it comes to this topic, and it was like, just in general during this time period, because let's talk about that real quick, because this is an important part of the record. Now, I'm 36. I'm 36. I went to college in 2004. And you guys, when I'm talking about this this breakdown of my own personal history, be looking at the banner and pay attention as to why I would say this. So you notice on number 3 says Manosphere 1.0, 1998 to 2004. Now, if I'm 36, which I am 36, you got to do the math. In 2004, I was 18 and I went to college. And it's really interesting because Facebook pretty much started in 2003, which is generally considered one of the first major social media type apps, websites. There wasn't apps back then, so it was a website. That's what it was. Now, the thing about it is, before Facebook, which was 2003, 2004, there was MySpace. There was all these different message boards, Yahoo Messenger, that were real popular the late 1990s, early 2000s. Really, when the internet really started popping off. But for you guys out there that are too young to really understand it, to know what was going on, we used to get these discs in the mail, these AOL discs. It was like really really annoying. Every other day we had one of those AOL discs. Someone that saved all those discs, they would sit there and basically have like a pile of 50 discs all over their table. The point is, if you sit there and you align those years with Manosphere 1.0, the logical conclusion you would arrive at is that even if the Manosphere, the both major races that really objectively founded it and started it, even if they wanted to organize in a super elite level, they were going to have a hard time doing it because the internet was still developing. Social media was still developing. That's the truth. That was going on during that time period. Okay, so let's move on to number 4. And before I continue, when it comes to talking point number 3, there's a reason ARC sits there and associates himself more so with that time period, because he always felt he got more respect from the white manosphere versus the black manosphere. Those aren't my words. Those are his words. Rest in peace to ARC. I'm just repeating what he would say. So really, if we're talking about Manosphere 1.0, just out of sheer logic, especially because whites are a bigger percentage of the population right now, and especially as you go back in time, during the 1960s, whites were about 80% of the population. 1998, that time period, look it up. But just by sheer logic, let's say there was 50 or 100 content creators that were big times in Manosphere 1.0. Just by sheer logic, the vast majority of them were going to be white content creators. So what I'm trying to say is, essentially, Manosphere 1.0 was basically the white manosphere. It was the white manosphere, and with some black content creators within the white manosphere. Does that make sense? And then later on, they started branching off in their own way, and they established what's now considered the Black Manosphere. There's a reason. Let me talk about this before I continue on the talking points. So right now, I pretty much explained why Obsidian, Angry Man, and O'Shea Duke Jackson are considered the founders of the Black Manosphere. They came later on, and they're the ones that essentially led the charge to develop the space in terms of the Black Manosphere. Now, when it comes to these topics, see, the thing is, what a lot of these guys, let's say there's a guy that listens to this, and he was doing manosphere-related content for a long period of time. The first thing he would say is, well, I was doing this stuff in 2006, 2004, so no, I was the founder. Here's the problem with that. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. There's a difference between being a player that's elite in the NBA versus a player that's a guy that plays basketball that's elite over there at Harlem on some street basketball. It's not the same thing. You got to claim the space. You have to sit there and make a bunch of connections in the space. You have to be part of the club. You have to be in the country club in order to fairly to be associating yourself with that club. And that's where the things get complicated, because like I was saying earlier, Alan Roger Curry, he would jump in and out being recognized in the different parts of the manosphere. Sometimes he'd be more associated with the manosphere, the white manosphere. Sometimes he would associate himself more with the Black manosphere. Where I would have conversations with him, I would have conversations with him in the Black manosphere. So it really gets into a real complicated discussion. And then the other thing is Alan Roger Curry, not just him, but as a dating coach, a bunch of dating coaches, they don't even claim the manosphere. They don't claim it because they don't want to be associated with the negative elements, the so-called misogynistic, sexist elements of the manosphere, that type of stuff. So what the content creators do, the dating coaches, they're like, okay, well, the solution to that problem is I just don't claim it. I don't claim any of those pills, even if their content has a bunch of agreement and alignment with one of the different pills or a bunch of the different pills. They just don't claim it. It's just straight up that simple. ARC, like I said, he would jump in and out of the manosphere, not just the white, the Black as well. So basically what he would do, depending on if there was some bad incident, if you know what I mean, that happened in society, he's like, well, I don't want to be associated with this, guys. You know, one time you can find it if you Google it. There was like a press release that he did from his assistant that released it. There was some big incident that happened out there, and he basically disavowed any association with the Black manosphere, with the manosphere in general. Like, I'm not part of those guys. I mean, I don't know what happened over there and who influenced the guy that did some stupid stuff, but I'm not a part of those dudes. And then this is where the things get complicated, because my thing is, I've been in and around the manosphere for a decade, and the manosphere has developed in a bunch of different locations. And that's something that the people out there have to understand. It wasn't just on YouTube, because remember, it isn't like YouTube was always a thing. There was all these different places, like books. There was books that were part of it, right? The guys like we were talking about, point number one, Tom Likas, right? The comedian Mr. O'Neill. They never officially claimed the space. One of them passed away, which was Mr. O'Neill. Tom Likas, when Kevin Samuels passed away, he took a shot at him and said, that's what you get for stealing my stuff. Basically saying you died for jacking my stuff, or paraphrasing my stuff, or plagiarizing my talking points, however you want to say it. If you guys that just came in here, thank you for coming in here. Like, share, subscribe, all the different things. If you want to review the video that has to do with talking points, I did it like 2 weeks ago. Go check it out, and you'll see, and I agree with it, why a lot of guys, even myself, why we're real sensitive about our unique talking points. There's a reason for it. But at the end of the day, it's really complicated as to who you're going to agree upon as being part of the manosphere. Some of these guys, they don't claim it. Sometimes they have good reason not to claim it. If your content is a mix of everything, politics, religion, dating, finances, someone like Satan the Sinner, I think it's okay for him not to claim the space. So, and there was a big, before we move on to number 4, because that's going to be an important point. I mean, I love all the points, but we're going to get to number 4 in a little bit. But the thing about it is, well, let me review number 4 first, okay? So once we get to number 4, things start getting really interesting. And this is something that's a big deal in terms of my content and how I relate to number 4. So I've been thinking about this for a very long period of time. I have spent a bunch of hours having this discussion with my friend. I got a bunch of friends, obviously, but I got a close friend that is in Panama, and we talk about a lot of the stuff that happens in the manosphere. So the discussion that we've had is how to sit there and put my content in some kind of box. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Well, this guy and this guy don't want to claim the manosphere. I fully claim it. But here's where things get complicated. If you were to review my content, you would notice there's a little bit of everything from every little sector. Now, I never did that on purpose. That's just how I live my life. And the way I've lived my life, my experiences and my knowledge of the stuff, that's what came out in the content. Okay? The reality is I've been casually sleeping with women for a long period of time. A lot of people in the PUA and just the manosphere community, they would call that pump and dump, to be more cruel about it. But you know what I would call it? And like I said before, in terms of the talking points, I don't really care about this so-called talking point. It just isn't that important for me to be associated with it. But what I've always called it is MGTOW Lite. So LITE, right? So you're essentially, you're trying to keep your so-called resources, your house, your cars. You're making sure you're not going to get married and get entangled with the divorce courts. So you're keeping that stuff to yourself. So it's essentially pump and dump. The MGTOW Lite is okay. You're kind of doing your own thing. You're keeping one foot in society, dealing with women in a bunch of more casual ways. But then your other foot is like, okay, well, I'm not sitting there. I'm not in a formal relationship. So that's essentially the MGTOW part of it. You see how that works? The point is, if you guys review my content, I have an extremely complicated mix of a bunch of different things. So for myself to pin myself down into any little subsector, or for someone to do it, because that's what people are going to do. As the channel grows, that's what people do. When a content creator's channel grows, that's just what people are going to naturally do. They're going to try to lock you down in a certain subsector. Now, some people, they just do it just because that just for, it's like a formal thing, right? A formality. But other people, they try to do it for negative purposes. So they're like, okay, well, you're part of that group, and now you're switching up. Now you're sitting there and you're jumping to the other side. You're jumping to the other side out of self-interest. No. And what I'll tell them in the future, a year from now, 2 years from now, I'm like, you know what? Go back to my content, my very first videos, the first 20, my first 50 videos, and you tell me if I really and truly was calculating. And what they would find is the answer is no, because you would see straight from the jump, there was a diversity of content in my videos straight off the jump. And this is really important because for the audience out there, I get it. I understand. I watch a bunch of content creators myself. I still do. The people in the audience, they want their content creators, their favorite ones, to be genuine in what they're saying. And they want them to really live by those principles and to really practice what they preach. Okay. So the videos that I've done, a couple videos, and I'm going to do some here in the next couple weeks, when it comes to the whole concept of passport bros, because it's trending, quote unquote trending. No, I've been traveling since the age of 1. Basically, my parents were born in Mexico and I was born in the United States. So ever since I could remember, I'd be hopping along in my little truck and my little stroller all the way to Mexico, deep into Mexico. People could say, well, that's not really passports. You're taking, even though you didn't want to go, or maybe you did, you were taken over there to Mexico. No, they can sit there and they can mentally play gymnastics all they want. At the end of the day, I was going to Mexico, and I've been there hundreds and hundreds of times. and I'm completely fluent in Spanish. And moreover, I used to work for this corporation where I would get flown to a bunch of different parts of the world to audit energy projects, construction projects. So I've been to Singapore, I've been to Norway. Now, the thing about it is it's real interesting. You guys can look it up, okay? So here's the thing. If you guys look up what security detail does with the president of the United States, what they do is the FBI put some decoys out there. So they put out in the news, okay, the president's going to stay at this place. He's going to go to this conference on this day. And basically what it ends up being, it's false. It's fake information, but it's put out there to kind of keep the people that might want to do something negative to the president, try to keep them at bay, to confuse them. Now, the report I read is that President Trump stayed at the same hotel I stayed at. So what's interesting about that hotel, I don't know if he did. There's no way to know. I'm not part of the FBI. But the name of that hotel is Shangri-La, something like that. SHANGRI-LA, something like that. Anyways, look it up. Really nice hotel, really fine. So, we're about to go to work. Well, all right, okay, let me explain when you fly to another part of the world. This is what happens. Okay, so I was flying to Singapore. I get on the plane in Houston, all the security steps and all that stuff. And we fly, it's probably like a 20-hour flight, if I remember correctly. We had to land in Moscow, Russia, to get some gasoline, right? Fill up the plane, all that type of stuff. Now, what they tell the people is like, okay, go stretch your legs, go walk for, 30 minutes. And once we fill up with gas, we're going to take off. So be back in an hour. Now, I was all excited. I mean, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I was all excited. I'm like, man, I'm about to see all these blonde bombshells, the stereotype, the infamous, okay, all these Russian babes that are just gorgeous models all over the place. And I'm all walking all throughout the airport. I'm all being all excited. And it was like a weird time. I think we landed there like at 1 o'clock, 2 in the morning. No, wait a minute. It was probably like 9 o'clock, 10 p.m. And I'll explain the rest of the story here in a little bit. But I remember it was probably like late at night. Well, let me explain something. I walked through the entire airport, and I can't believe it until this day. I could not believe it. And I'm not being a dick, but there was not one beautiful blonde in there, not one beautiful Russian woman in there, not one. And there's debatable if there was even one pretty woman in there. If anything, there might have been a couple quote unquote cute women in there. And I'm not just trying to be a jerk. This is just part of the interesting sidebar of this stream. So here's the point. I landed in Singapore, and my boss was like, okay, we landed like at 2-3 in the morning. And he's like, okay, you do know we're about to go to work here in a little bit, right? And I was like, okay, what time are we going? He's like, okay, we'll be over here at the lobby at 8:30. So I went to sleep for 3-4 hours. And at the front desk, what you do at this type of hotel, at the front desk, I told the lady, like, the ladies all asking me, well, do you need a wake up call or something like that? I was like, yeah. And I'm all thinking like I was going to get some little phone call like you get at a lot of hotels. This is what happened, because I didn't really get told what was going to happen. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I need it at 8 o'clock or whatever, 7:45, so I can shower and get ready. So like I just hear a knock on my door, and it's like a bellhop that's all, wake up, time to go to work. I'm like, I'm up. I take a shower, I get ready, and I go to work. So the point is, my content is a mix of a little bit of everything. I don't do that intentionally. That's just how my life has developed. That's just how my thought process has developed. That's just how my behavior and my dealings with women has developed. So to anyone that ever hears this, to my supporters that are hardcore, whatever, in the future, when I'm doing all this diversity of content, I'm not switching up for shit. That's just, I'm genuine in what I say in all these different streams. I preach what I really and truly believe. Like I've said before, and I'll say it a bunch of times moving into the future, I don't do myself any favors when I say most women are not sluts, which is the truth, which is accurate. Because if I wanted to, because I am Mexican, right? And it is a problem in a bunch of different ethnic groups of the Latino race, there's a little bit and too much of machismo. So if I really wanted to, I could sit here and go through all these streams and say, bitch, whore, slut. And, you got to sit there and say all this negative stuff about women. I could sit there and double and triple my subscribers. if I was really that type of person that's self-interested and does whatever it takes to get higher subs and to make a dollar. But I'm not that type of person. That type of here's the thing, that type of information and that type of I don't want to say teachings, but that's that type of rhetoric. It doesn't help men to get better outcomes with women. What can help men is giving them elite knowledge about female nature, and then they utilize it in order to get better outcomes with women. Now, we're about to get to that point. A lot of people, a lot of women, just discussing the negative aspects of female nature. So here's the thing. Let me say this because this is a real important point. Here's the thing. This is where things get really interesting. If every single video, and I'm dead serious, follow me on this. If every single Manosphere video, if every single book, every single podcast, every single radio, all of it, everything related to the Manosphere, if all the different stuff removed all the legit misogynistic, really out there type language, all the different stuff I just said earlier, you know, bitch and all these other things, and you know, all the stuff that's really, really, really bad, that's objectively really, really bad and just shouldn't be said about women. Let me tell y'all a secret. What do y'all think I'm about to say? What's the secret I'm about to tell you? The secret is a lot of women, most women would still have a big problem with the manosphere. And they don't like the manosphere, a lot of them, because it neutralizes the playing field. Because let me explain something, and I'm going to do a full stream on it one day. Let me explain who the real red pillars, the original red pillars are. You know who they are? Let me explain who they are. They're women. And you know why they're women? You know why it's women and not the male gender? Because women, they are naturally, they do not trust men for their own safety and protection. So when you hear a bunch of different women and a bunch of different people describe the red pill and the manosphere, they call it misogynistic and sexist for pointing out the negative aspects of female nature. It's like, okay, well, why are you going out of your way to try to figure out why women are gold diggers? But here's the catch. You got to remember what I just said 30 seconds ago. A lot of women, most women, maybe all women, are naturally distrustful of men. If they deal with the wrong man, if they spend time with the wrong man, if their instincts fail them, they could be dealing with the man that would do them harm. So they naturally have to be distrustful men to protect themselves. Now, as someone that's a man, and to the men that hear this stuff and to the men in the audience, I think a lot of men would be like, okay, I can see why women think that way. And I think most men wouldn't sit there and try to shame that behavior and shame that thought process out of women, because it logically makes sense. Okay, yeah, she doesn't want to sit there and deal with the wrong guy that, you know, could get her pregnant, and in a poor country in the middle of nowhere over there in Central America, where it's dangerous, where women really and truly need a man for protection because it's a third world country. You see how that works? So like I said, if you sit there and you think about the logic of all these different things, that's where you arrive. So now we're at point number 4. So like, share, subscribe. The people that are listening to this and the audience in the cloud, it moves my stream up the ladder, gets more promoted out there around the world. If you like what you're hearing, if you're so inclined, my Cash App is pinned at the top of the stream on YouTube, $ Ace of Spades 100. If you like the information, remember the banner's right there, and we're working our way towards number 8. And then you guys remember what the title of the stream is. I'm going to talk about eventually, I'm going to tie all this logic together as to how and why women were essentially, quote unquote, tricked into being in the manosphere, in the red pill. So now we're on number 4. Number 4 Now, this is where things start getting a little complicated because there's a bunch of infamous PUAs out there, a bunch of different companies, a bunch of different ones that had notorious reputations. And it's just like anything else. Everyone has their favorite brand. Okay, you might like Nike or Adidas. You might be like one of those people that, well, I'm not going to wear Adidas anymore because Kanye West is doing stupid stuff again. And I couldn't blame you and I wouldn't blame you. Okay, that's your choice. That's your right. Or, you disavow that political party because of the person that became the head of it. Okay, there you go. You see how the logic goes? So let me explain Roosh V. So basically, and he's going to be a guy that's going to be a common thread throughout my videos, throughout the history of my channel. He just happens to be one of those guys that I respect his knowledge, his experience with women, and all the different teachings that he used to talk about. Now, he became real religious, so he doesn't crank out any books related to this stuff anymore. Okay? But when he was really active, he was banned from a bunch of different countries around the world. His books were banned from Amazon. A lot of payment methods where he would get paid by supporters, PayPal, and a bunch of these different places, they cut him off because of the notorious reputation he was building. Now, here's the thing. Let me make this clear. Just because I consider him one of the best content creators that deals with the manosphere and the history of the manosphere, it doesn't mean I agree with everything that he says. It doesn't mean I sit there and condone some of the real negative stuff that he was associated with. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't with him in person when he would deal with women. I wasn't there to really hear what he was telling women. Some of these PUAs, they were doing some stuff that's considered really, really, really negative, real evil type stuff towards women. It doesn't mean I agree with that stuff. It doesn't mean I do it because I haven't done it. I do treat women with respect. And I've done, over the long period of time, I've done a bunch to help women where I really didn't have any real reason to do it. So that's what I would say when it comes to that. But, when it comes to Roosh V, you notice that I put the year 2007 attached to that time period because at the end of the day, you'll notice that I have all these different years on the banner. The year that I put up there, whether I say late 1990s or I say 2007, all that different stuff, I picked the year or the years where these guys were most associated with being as part of their prime, so-called prime, where they were really doing a bunch to establish themselves, whether they were real infamous in the media, whether they were really just cranking out elite content, whether their website first started, that type of stuff. At the end of the day, that's more or less when they were really popping off. Doesn't matter if it's off by 6 months or a year. At the end of the day, the years are fairly accurate. So you notice there's a slash. There's a slash when it comes to that. So the slash is VH1 PUA. Now, let me explain what happened during that time period. So there was a show on VH1 where it was basically broadcasting to the United States and the world for the people that had access to the broadcasting United States of the whole concept of PUA. So it was basically, quote unquote, letting out all the secrets of the whole concept of PUA. Now, here's the thing about it. This is where things get really interesting because Alan Roger Curry and the different people that you listen out here, they sometimes refer to themselves as PUAs. Sometimes other people refer to them as PUAs. A lot of times, a lot of these guys, they don't want to be grouped in that group, and I can understand why. And part of it is because, there's a difference. Some of the guys, when it comes to the whole concept of PUAs, the problem with a lot of those guys, they overpromised, underdelivered. So they would be like, okay, well, looks doesn't really matter. If you have good enough mouthpiece, you can sit there and get any woman. Or they would sit there and be like, okay, well, if you're charming enough, you could run through dime pieces. And the thing about it is, you got to think about this from a logical perspective. They don't need to find 200,000 men that believe that stuff. All they needed to find was 2,000, 3,000, depending on the size of the company or the content creator or whatever, 700 people to pay that price. Now, the issue is because some of them would overpromise, underdeliver, they would start creating a group of men that really would target them and really hated them. And then eventually some of those men would do stupid stuff in society, if you know what I mean. So you notice, and the thing about it is, when you hear a bunch of people out there that say game is manipulation, the thing about it is that's one of those talking points that people rattle, that it just starts becoming an empty slogan. Because let me talk about a little bit of what I do with women, and I'm going to explain where I don't think it's manipulation. It could be argued that it is, but I don't think it is. If I take a woman on the date, on the first date, and I see where it's going, okay, I'm going to sleep with her. It might or might not go beyond that. But what a lot of guys would say, well, you didn't tell her, you met her at Starbucks, and you didn't tell her from the jump that you just wanted to sleep with her. Which is, I'm going to get into ARC's philosophy one day. That ain't today. Today isn't that day. But the thing is, a lot of guys would basically say, okay, if you're not directly telling a woman, whether the day you met her or maybe 3 days later or over the phone, over text, if you're not telling her that you just want to sleep with her, you're basically, everything else is manipulation. If you're not being direct with it, you're manipulating her. Nah, I don't agree with that, because my thing is, what I've done, my standard policy is, I get a phone number and I talk to her for a couple of days or whatever, and then I invite her over to my house or whatever, back in the days when I was in my dorm in college, or we go on a date. Okay. And then I see what happens. Okay, who knows? Maybe I'll fall hard for this woman. You never know. You might make a woman your girlfriend. So I essentially start off in an indirect type mode. And then once we slept together a couple times, I start being more direct. I start telling her, well, I'm not really looking for a relationship, or, we can have something casual. If she asks me straight up, well, where is this going? I'm going to tell her the truth. There's some guys out there that would say that's manipulation. I think that's a middle ground. A lot of times, most of the time, that's never caused me issues with women, because you got to remember, some women want casual sex too, but they don't want to be treated like a prostitute. They want to be courted a little bit. It's like a little game, right? Okay, yeah, I just want to smash this dude casually, but I still want him to take me out to go get drinks or whatever, or go, I don't know, take me to bow or something, right? Bowling. You see how that works? It's essentially a mix of the two. But here's the problem. The reason that phrase came about is because a lot of PUAs, they would go out of their way to manipulate women to get sex out of them. They would sit there and tell them whatever they wanted to hear. They would sit there and lie to them all these different crazy things in order to get in their pants, right? Now, if they did that nowadays, let's say the PUAs, let's say if that era had begun, I don't know, like 5 years ago, whenever the Me Too era came around, it would be a really, really bad field day for a lot of these guys, because all these women would be Me Tooing all these different men, right? So the thing about it is, the point is, this stuff gets complicated because there's a fine line between being charming and actually flat out manipulating women. Those two words, there's a difference. All right, here's the thing. There's a reason we have all these different words in the English language. They might be similar in meaning, but they're different for different reasons, depending on what the situation is, the context, all these different things. So basically what happened in 2007, that time period, PUA started becoming more mainstream. The idea was put out there. VH1 was obviously a big time network back in the days. Right now, I don't really watch that much TV, so I don't really know where they stand. But a lot of women started, quote unquote, figuring out the secrets and the methods of all these different guys. And they're like, okay, well, you're not going to outsmart me anymore because I already know what's going on. Pickup lines and all this other things. So number five, I have a lot of subscribers from the Black Manosphere. Shout out to you guys. Like, share, subscribe, comment after the stream if there's something you heard and you want to talk about it some more. So number 5, Tommy Sotomayor. Now, he's a real interesting guy because he's one of those guys that has always kind of done manosphere related content, but he's never for the most part, he's never really claimed the space, because what he would say is, well, I don't want to be associated with those guys because I think those guys don't get laid. So I don't want to be grouped with those guys. And I'm not making that stuff up. That's essentially paraphrasing what he has said before. But here's the problem with that dude. Problem with that dude is he's never really wanted to be associated with the space, but he's gone into the Black Manosphere and all these different panels to promote himself and to try to get bigger in terms of his name. And then he wants to get credit for all this different stuff that's been cranked out by the space. Okay, so you can't have it both ways. You see where that starts falling apart. Which one is it? Are you part of the space and you're going to get some of the credit for having developed it and for having helped develop it to what it is now? Or you're outside the space? You're outside the space and you're not going to sit there and be getting any real credit for it. You can't have it both ways. And that's kind of where the things have kind of fall apart for him, where things have been difficult for him. The guy is essentially banned from YouTube. If he sits there and starts a channel, one time he got banned in the middle of the stream. That was some crazy stuff. I was watching the middle. I was in the middle of the stream. He didn't get the stream like taken down. He got banned off YouTube. It like said some message like, well, this channel's not available on YouTube anymore. And you just see like Tommy disappear. Like he's right there in his chair hanging out. And then out of nowhere says, well, this channel disappeared off YouTube. It was some crazy ass stuff. So essentially, I don't know what they did. They got it programmed in the AI, artificial intelligence, or it's not even sometimes what he's tried to do, and it's funny as fuck. So sometimes what he's done is like he started a channel and he doesn't even cam up. He's like, man, that'll probably work. I don't cam up. They can't pick up my face if I don't put my face on the screen. And then he still gets banned. Probably his voice. Who knows? Maybe a lot of people mass reporting him. Whatever. The point is he's probably had like 20, 25, 30 channels banned. The guy would essentially and easily be way over 1 million subs if he had never got banned in the first place. And I'm being really generous, maybe 1.5 million, maybe even 2 million, but it would easily be above 1 million. The guy's just a real talented dude, real charismatic, real intelligent. He knows what he's talking about. He has a pretty big name even today. But, you know, if you guys want to check him out, he's on Rumble, where he hasn't got banned. So you guys look him up. You guys that don't know who he is, go look him up. Go look him up on Rumble. He's a cool dude for the most part. But we're gonna get to the part in a little bit, the issues he had with Kevin Samuels. We're not there yet. So we're working our way towards the time period now. So now we're on number 6. We're in the infamous point of number 6. Now, anyone want to guess, especially you guys that don't spend a bunch of time in the manosphere, anyone want to guess what I'm referring to on point number 6? Any of you guys in the clouds, what that refers to, what that's about? Shout out to all you guys. Appreciate you coming by. Like, share, subscribe. It puts me higher in the algorithm. You guys that don't have an account, you're never going to hear a content creator say what I'm about to say. See, a lot of content creators, what they don't know, and I figured this out on my own, out of nowhere, but when they say all this like, share, subscribe stuff, what they don't know is if you don't have a YouTube account, there's a lot of these things that you can't do. You see what I'm saying? It's like, if you don't have an account at this business or whatever, how are you going to sit there and deal with it in a certain kind of way? How am I going to use a PayPal card if I never got one? I never signed up for one in the first place. So how are you going to sit there and like and subscribe and do some of these things if you don't have a YouTube account? So you guys in the clouds that don't have a YouTube account, get a YouTube account, subscribe to my channel, and I'm going to give you some real good information. The other thing about it, the other thing I would say is when it comes to the streams, I'll be streaming at a bunch of different times of the day. I got a weird schedule and the type of work that I do, so I can't do the same time of day every single day. I just can't do it. So you guys just be on the lookout, hit that bell, all notifications, and just be on the lookout for streams. A lot of times the streams are going to be late at night. I just don't like doing it in the middle of the day because I got a lot of stuff going on. But most of the time, it's probably going to be late at night. Anyways, talking point number 6. So we got to Mr. Rollo Tomassi. His book, The Rational Male, came out in 2013. Now, a lot of people currently, in the past couple years, they have associated him, and he has called himself as the godfather of the red pill. Now, let me discuss a bunch of the different issues with that. Now, remember what I was saying earlier. If someone, and I agree with this, I do pretty much agree with this. If you haven't written books on this type of stuff, it's not really fair to sit there and really be considered legit. Okay, you really want to be considered in a serious intellectual in the field that you are, put that stuff in a book, which means, see, the thing is, there's a difference between critiquing a book or an article on a website versus critiquing what's going on in a verbal form on a stream or on a podcast. Take Tommy Sotomayor, for example. There's no way you'll ever get your hands on some of his broadcasts. It doesn't matter how hard you try. Now, if he had written some books on the different stuff, he did a documentary. I think it's called Fatherless America. You guys go find it if you want to watch it. But at the end of the day, as far as I know, he hasn't written a book. So, when you write a book, and I am going to write a book eventually, you sit there and you lay out your core philosophies, and people in the future, they can't sit there and say, well, I'm not going to take you seriously. You just did your little videos on YouTube, like, LOL. They used to laugh. But let me explain something since we're on this talking point before I move on to Rollo Tomasi. See, that's the thing about Tommy Sotomayor. That's why he gets to be a talking point all by himself. They used to clown him. They used to make fun of him, and he's talked about it in a bunch of different ways. Like, why are you doing those little videos on YouTube? Are you stupid? Are you going to sit there and make your little money? There's no money in what you're doing. Like, why are you making those videos? They would talk a bunch of shit to him and about him because back in the days, YouTube was really first starting off, right? So the thing about it is, okay, yeah, I'll tell a story here in a little bit that's interesting. Shout out to Nino. I'll stick around for the whole stream. I'll talk about it here later on in the stream. So, when it comes to Tommy Sotomayor, all these different things, they would clown him. They would clown him for doing his little videos on YouTube. They would sit there. A lot of people, he was getting a lot of heat, okay? Because remember, this came way before Kevin Samuels, before this stuff really and truly became mainstream. And what ended up happening is he had got so much heat that there was a person that would fly a drone over his house. So you heard that correctly. That this guy that he had an issue with or whatever, he would basically fly a little helicopter over his house to try to intimidate him. So he couldn't. I think one time, I've seen the video before, but he was basically, I think, in New York City, and this guy was trying to cheap shot him or something. And he didn't really go with the security. So, I mean, he could have basically got killed, right? He could have got killed by 2-3 different men and all these different issues. You see what I'm saying? The point is, when you're a content creator, you start putting yourself out there in public. Once you get to a certain level, you're really and truly considered to be a public figure where you're more recognizable, and you got to the point where there's some danger involved in doing what you do, especially when it comes to the manosphere. So that's why he gets his own talking point. That's why he gets a bunch of respect in terms of the stream, in terms of the history of the manosphere. And I'm going to tie all this stuff together when we get to the enchilada of number 8, the final point. So with respect to number 6, 2013, that's when The Rational Male came out from Rollo Tomasi, widely respected in the manosphere. It doesn't mean I respect it or don't respect it. I'm just saying what's a lot of people do. It's generally respected by a bunch of people. A lot of the talking points you hear from Fresh and Fit, they came from that book. Because I can't see, here's the thing, when I'm doing these streams, because I'm sure there's some people that hear my streams, well, why are you explaining something we already know? No, here's the problem. There'll be people out there in the clouds that come to this my streams or whatever. They're not from the manosphere. They don't understand this stuff. They haven't heard any of this stuff. And they're like, okay, this is interesting. What is this guy? Okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to let him break down what I haven't ever heard before. So you see why I have to break it down. So basically, Rollo Tomasi, he came out with The Rational Male in 2013, and he's the so-called godfather of the red pill. Self-proclaimed, and other people have attached that title to him. Now, this is what I'm going to say. One of these days, maybe 6 months from now, I'm going to do a video and I'm going to logically explain why ARC was the real godfather of the red pill, not Rollo Tomasi. Now, what a lot of you guys are going to say, well, you're just saying that because ARC came out a decade or 2 decades before him. That's why you're saying that. No. The arguments are going to be way more logical and they're going to be real elite. And I'm going to explain why that's true. All right, let's put it this way. If they had came out in the same exact year, the arguments would still be the same and the logic would still, it would and it will sit there and really make sense. So you notice how that worked. So when it comes to the Rational Male and Rollo Tomasi, he's had significant influence over Fresh and Fit. This is what I would say about Fresh and Fit. When they were popping off, and we're going to get to the main event on point 8, but we're going to do a little sidebar, and I'm going to connect Rollo Tomasi to Fresh and Fit right now. So what made Fresh and Fit, because it doesn't really matter if you like the guys or you don't, those guys have extreme high-end business sense. I mean, it's super elite business sense. Those dudes are extremely brilliant when it comes to anything business related. Like I said another day, I don't know, it's like 3 weeks ago, I was talking about how when there was a racial type controversy where this female, this low tier rapper, I've never heard of her until that day, Asian doll, they got into some beef in the studio and Fresh and Myron were getting a lot of heat for it. So this is what happened. Myron and Fresh, they drank their little beer after that stream. They did a little hustle. You know what I mean? They played cards or whatever, and they thought to themselves, we need to fix the situation. We need to get some of this heat off us. This is not good for our brand. So you know what those dudes did? They picked up the phone and they flew in Tommy Sotomayor so he could be the leader of fighting back against that stuff. Now, Tommy Sotomayor, he had a much bigger name in the past. 2009, 2010, 2011, and all that. Obviously, Fresh and Fit now has a bigger name. So Fresh and Fit's like, okay, but this guy still has a big name. In general, he still has a big name. We'll fly him in to Miami, and he'll take some of the heat off us, and he can sit there, and then, we'll just sit back and we'll let Tommy Sotomayor do his thing. He'll be the star of the show for the next couple of days. Now, what ended up happening in one of those streams is this girl, he was debating a black woman, and a black woman punched him in the face, right? She was about to pick up a microphone and beat him with the microphone, but I think what ended up happening, you guys go look it up, she punched him in the face. And the funny part is, Tommy's like, oh, I'm gonna sue, like, like the guy slip and fall, like at the supermarket, like, oh, I slipped on a banana peel, she broke my neck and all this stuff. He's all like crumbling on the floor, like she had really killed him or something. You gotta go find the stream. It's pure comedy. So, with respect to Rational Male and Rollo Tomasi and all these different guys, the point is, Fresh and Fit, what they did, what was really intelligent. I don't know you guys that play video games or like video games. Fresh and Fit, what they did is they built a little shield around them with all these different content creators. So when they were coming up and their subs were still pretty small, relatively speaking, 5K, 10K, 20K subs. Obviously now they're way over 1 million subs. They surrounded themselves with a bunch of people that would protect them, that would sit there and prop them up. Rollo Tomasi, Donovan Sharp, Modern Life Dating. The other day, I asked them a question of how they first started talking and what kind of connection they had. I don't know. It was a real complicated answer, but kind of what I gathered from it, they were doing something like fitness related, because Modern Life Dating, that's part of his content and his product. Okay, do this and this and this to be in shape. And I think Myron and him had some kind of connection, and they've been friends ever since then. Donovan Sharp, he had Myron. He had Myron on his show, the 7 or the 6. If someone was missing, it'd basically be the 6. In general, the name of the little show, the little segment of one of those days would be the 7. Kevin Samuels was on that show as well. The point is, Fresh and Fit built a nice little shield to protect themselves and to build up their name and to develop their knowledge of female nature until the point where they could really pretty much handle their own, for the most part, and not get punked, not get punked by women that really had their number. And it's a conversation for another day, but you guys know what happened with Brittany Renner in terms of Myron. So you guys look it up if you haven't. if you haven't. So the point is, when it comes to the rational male and it comes to Rollo Tomasi, I'll just say this, and I'm gonna move on to number 7. Just because you're able to sit there and mentally masturbate over this concept of hypergamy and all this other junk, it doesn't mean you really can teach. It doesn't mean you can really and truly teach men how to sit there and not be subject to the worst aspects or the potential worst aspects of hypergamy in different kinds of women, right? And that's the thing about Alan Roger Curry. If you sit there and you have a bunch of experience with women, you can really break down his philosophy, and you can sit there and really have a firm understanding as to how he really and truly teaches in his books how to really protect yourself from the quote unquote bad aspects of hypergamy. That's a conversation for another day. The point is, if you guys that came in just right now, later on, a lot of guys don't know this. I didn't know it for a long period of time. You can put the speed of the stream 1.5x speed or 2.0 or 1.25, whatever. If you guys want to review the whole stream later on after it's done, tomorrow or whatever, that's what you can do. So now we're down to point number 7. So before I continue to point number 7, you noticed all the different complicated people of the different points. Some of those guys were a radio host, Tom Likas. There was a comedian in there, which a lot of people in the Black Manosphere, they really respect. Mr. O'Neill, Patrice O'Neill, okay. Alan Roger Curry, you notice how he's real early in the banner, late 1990s when he came out with his book, Mode 1, the first copy of it, May 1999. Manosphere 1.0, really and truly, that was more so the white Manosphere 1.0 with some black content creators mixed up in there. And then there was the different branching offs of the different manospheres, okay? Roosh V, we just barely talked about that a little earlier. One of the most infamous PUAs in anything related to the history of the space. VH1, when there was the PUA show that talked about PUAs and featured all the different concepts of PUAs. Okay, number 5, Tommy Sotomayor. We talked about how he was one of those dudes that always kind of wanted credit for what happened in the Black Manosphere and what happened with KS, but he would only kind of do it out of self-interest. So the reality is, here's the thing, like I was saying in the beginning of the stream, I'm trying to say this stuff from the most unbiased perspective and objectively talking about the stuff for the record of anyone who ever listens to the stream. So the reality is, one of the things that Tommy Sotomayor would say, he would be like, well, I don't want to be associated with the Black Manosphere because those guys, and I'm not sitting here making stuff up. I literally have heard the stream where he said it. Well, I didn't really want to be associated with those guys because I thought those guys were, they couldn't get laid or they were weird, and that's why they did their little content. But you sit there and you flip the coin on his head, and he essentially has a bunch of content that mirrors exactly what the Black Manosphere has been associated with during its inception. Okay, a little bit we're going to tie Tommy Sotomayor to KS, so we're not there yet. So now number 7, Julian Blanc, one of the most infamous situations that happened in the history of the Manosphere. And I don't think I'm being dramatic. I would say that a lot of people, if they're being fair-minded, that's exactly what it is. So he's a PUA that used to work for this company called RSD, okay? They were a major corporation that had a bunch of different dating coaches, and I was talking about the distinctions between dating coaches and PUAs earlier, and why a lot of them don't want to be associated with the other brand, and why a lot of different dating coaches don't like claiming any kind of pill from the Manosphere. That starts becoming real complicated. If you want to hear that breakdown, you're going to have to watch the stream later on from the jump. The point is, what happened with Julian Blanc, you can look it up. You can put it in the YouTube search bar. Basically, he went on CNN and he was basically trying to defend the practices of being PUAs. Okay? Now, this is where things get real complicated. It's real interesting. I find it real interesting. And one of these days, I'm going to debate a feminist, and I'll promote it on my community tab. But you know what's? This is one of the main arguments I would tell these feminists. See, the thing about it is, they like to throw around the word incel a bunch and talk shit about men that quote unquote can't get laid. Okay, but think about what I just said real carefully before I make the next comment. So they love to sit there and be, some of them basically mock, and it's not funny. It's not funny to me. It's not funny to me because I remember when I was younger, when I was 18, 19, 20, and I was trying to figure out all this stuff. So really, when a feminist is mocking that talking point and really mocking men for that type of thing, what they're really doing is they're mocking every single man on this earth. And they're mocking every single man on this earth because at some point we were all virgins, right? Doesn't really matter when we first slept with a woman, but we were all virgins at some point in time. So really, when they use that stupid little talking point, it's really like misandrous. I would say it's misandrous, which is essentially the hate of men. So misogyny is the hate of women. Misandry is the hate of men. Okay, so but here's the thing. Here's where the contradiction begins. Okay, so how can you sit there and be talking shit about men that can't get laid, or they're having a difficulty getting laid, and then 20 seconds later say, well, you're misogynistic for teaching men how to get laid. You're a PUA, you're a dating coach, so you're teaching guys how to get laid. That makes you misogynistic. See, you got to think about the logic behind that. Let me explain something when it comes to Andrew Tate with respect to him and Rich. And we're going to talk about a couple different things: OnlyFans and then Andrew Tate. See, the problem that a lot of women have with Andrew Tate is he monetized something that a lot of women are doing anyways. So he took his cut. In other words, they don't. It's real comical, and they're hypocrites. They don't have an issue with all these women on OnlyFans doing all this different stuff, but they have an issue with men getting a cut out of it, right? And what's interesting? There's a bunch of different states, and I think New York does it. Think about the logic of this and how ridiculous it is. So what they do is, okay, they criminalize the guy buying XXX, but the woman that's essentially selling it, nothing happens to her. How does that make any sense? So let me say that again. If you're a woman and you're over there selling your body to a John, whatever you want to call him, over there in New York City, if you get caught, you don't go to jail, you don't get a fine, but the guy does get a fine and he does go to jail. See, that type of stuff, when you start doing those type of things in this society, and it really doesn't matter where you do it, a lot of guys are just going to naturally be like, okay, you want to sit there. And I did a real good stream on this yesterday, and it's got a bunch of views. I made this argument. The core of my argument the other day was the way women, I'll just summarize the whole stream and I'm going to do it in 2 minutes. Basically, the whole argument in my entire stream that I made 24 hours ago or whatever is women's behavior towards men being real disrespectful, going out of their way to sit there and use guys for financial type of stuff, sitting there and just basically thumbing their nose at men and being super calculating, like, well, okay, well, I got 15 years to settle down. I'll settle down at age 40. The only way that really works is if men are actually going to marry them. If they don't marry them, all that stuff falls apart. The entire house of cards falls apart. So if you want to know the primary reason that women act the way they do towards men, the main pillar, the main castle of all that is because women assume they're still going to get the financial security at the end of the road. Everything leads to that. All the different things that could possibly be the reason as to why women act the way. Well, they think they have an influx of options because of social media. Okay, but do they really have that many options? At the end of the road, it still leads to the same question. Are they going to be able to secure a mate for marriage, which is in the United States? If a woman marries the right person, if they marry a guy that has a decent income and he's going to start making more money over time, and forget about the emotional stuff, or forget about personality and love and all that different things, just from a financial perspective, if a woman marries the right guy, which most of them do, 97% of alimony, when it takes place in the states that have it, goes to women. And I'll sit there and do a counter argument to my own argument. it's so lopsided in part because a lot of guys have so much pride to sit there and try to file to get their portion of it, right? To have women pay them out after a divorce. Okay, cool. At the end of the day, it still would be lopsided. But think about it from this perspective. If a woman marries, and most women will only get married if it's going to financially benefit them, if they marry the right guy, which will be most of them, they win, right? If there's a divorce, they still win. They win because the court system is so lopsided in their favor. And remember, in the first place, they married a guy that they knew was going to make a bunch of money over time. If a guy's making 50K at age 25, at 28, the dude's going to be making 90K at age 35, whatever. So it's just, it goes back to what we're about to talk about. Remember what the main event here in a little bit is. Point number 8. Point number 8, the title of the stream is how Kevin Samuels really and truly was the first content creator in the manosphere that was able to quote unquote trick into coming into the space. Okay, but let's focus on number 7 first. We need to sit there and talk about that one. So Julian Blanc, he used to work for RSD. This company, for all intention purposes, doesn't exist. It's defunct. And the reason that's essentially true is because they had to start rebranding under a bunch of different things. Okay, well, now I'm going to call myself a self-improvement coach. Okay, now I'm going to call myself a life coach. Now I'm going to call myself, okay, I travel around the world and tourist coach, or all these different weird stuff that you'd have to sit there and fry your brain like they did to come up with those titles, right? Those, what they sit there and describe themselves to be. And a big part of that is because of the interview. So what happened is he was doing the interview and the host of CNN had his number. And what I mean by had his number, he had done a research a bunch and he had sit there and bombard the guy and cut him off and sit there and really corner him and not let him speak. Now, who else did that happen to? If you guys look it up, Andrew Tate and Piers Morgan. Andrew Tate showed up to the show and he would start making a statement, and then Piers Morgan would be a little chump and ask him another question. So he asked him a question, and then Andrew Tate would start speaking with 5 words, and then Piers Morgan would ask him another question 2 seconds after he asked him the first question. You see how that's just a bunch of junk? And that's the thing about a bunch of Manosphere content creators. That's why a lot of Manosphere content creators over the years, they never wanted to go on mainstream media. Now, who recently went up there, and I haven't watched the stream, Rollo Tomasi of the Rational Male fame, he went up there with Dr. Phil. There's 2 content creators that claimed they were invited over there to Dr. Phil a long time ago. One of them, I believe him. The other one, I'm not so sure I believe them. So those other 2 people are Donovan Sharp. He used to write for Roosh V at returnofkings.com. Okay. You know, now it should start really adding up as to why he's on this list. Obsidian used to write for Roosh V. Okay. Write articles. He's one of the 3 founders of the Black Manosphere. So Obsidian, O'Shea Duke Jackson. And then you have the Angry Man. You see how all this stuff starts adding up real pretty. So with respect to Julian Blanc and the different landmark time periods of PUAs, when you have, the point is, this is important because when you have, all right, we're in 2023. When you have a bunch of guys taking shots at dating coaches and really going in on a bunch of different content creators, this is problematic if people don't understand the history of the space. Now, I'm not saying someone has to understand the history of the space 100% in order to critique content creators or that type of stuff. But when you sit there and you have an obsessive focus, like a lot of people do, at taking shots at content creators, at their material and their ideas and their philosophies, and you don't have a real true understanding of what's going on in that space, of what's happening, in many ways, you do a disservice to the rest of us and to the image this space is trying to portray out to the world. So, like I said, you guys got to watch that short. I don't know who's in here, my longtime supporters. You guys are really missing out if you haven't watched that short where that rapper pulled up on a Manosphere content creator. Okay, so that content creator, the honest truth, he used to go at Kevin Samuels, and he basically was a quote unquote fraud. So they looked up, someone doxed him and looked into his personal background. He used to be like a gang member and a thug and all these other things, and he used to be real anti women. But he came online to kind of market himself as being a defender of women. But when that rapper called in, because that rapper Smoke Ghost Perp, he had issues with Cynthia G, and I'm not going to get into that, but look her up if you don't know who she is. So what happened is, the guy, you guys got to watch that short. It's one of the most, I don't know, I think it's one of the best things I've ever seen on the internet. So I don't want to ruin it, but I'll just say that the guy called into a show, and the content creator didn't think it was him. You guys go check it out. It's like one of the most recent shorts. You guys go check it out. So when it comes to Julian Blanc, he brought a bunch of negative attention to the manosphere. The phrase started going out of style, the acronym PUAs. There's a bunch of people, you do hear it by a bunch of people in the modern era, even though really and truly it's something that isn't really part of the modern era. And what I mean by the modern era, the past couple years, okay, past 3 years, past 4 years, they're over here using a phrase that really and truly went out of style a long time ago. Okay. So, but it's an important mark in manosphere history, because it was one of the first times someone that came out of the manosphere that was on national television. Now, you guys that haven't been here from the beginning of the stream, like I said before, a lot of PUAs, a bunch of dating coaches, they don't like to claim the space. They don't like to claim any of the pills, because they don't want to be associated with the concepts of hypergamy and all these different things that women are looking for in man. Because if they start agreeing with some of that stuff, or they start conceding the point on some of those so-called theories, it makes their life more difficult in finding clients and finding people to support them. I'm just keeping it real. That's just the truth. I don't shoot the messenger. So like I was saying, Donovan Sharp, he was one of the guys that was invited to Dr. Phil, supposedly. You guys notice how Piers Morgan treated Andrew Tate. If you haven't seen it, look it up. The other person who I highly respect and who I highly encourage all my subscribers to sit there and go subscribe to him and check him out, Sandman, one of the leaders of MGTOW, MGTOW. He was invited to be on Dr. Phil, but he's not a guy that cams up. So because he's never cammed up, he's like, okay, well, they're just trying to bring me on so they can sit there and harass me and that type of stuff. And they're going to sit there and clip the videos in a way which makes me look dumb. So Sandman's like, okay, well, I just won't go. That's the way you win that game. All right. Like, share, subscribe. If you like all the stuff you've been hearing, if you like what's going on in this channel, every once in a while, toss a couple dollars in the Cash App. Really appreciate it. It'll help develop the production of the channel, because the production is going to keep going up and up and up, right? In terms of reaction reviews, in terms of the research that's done for streams, all the different stuff, the quality of the mics. I got a real high-end Shure mic for my pre-records, but that type of mic, I can't use it for a live show. That's on a it's not made for a laptop. So it's a pre-record that's used to do pre-records on a phone, but you can't use that special mic in terms of laptops, right? With laptops. So anyways, if you like what's going on, $ Ace of Spades, 100, you see it pinned at the top. So now we're down to the main event, number 8, 2020. Now, anyone want to guess, anyone in the clouds, anyone want to guess why I attached 2020 to it? Because I could easily put another year to it, 2022, 2021. Obviously, you guys that are in this space, y'all know he passed away. Like I said, I can't assume that everyone that watches my streams is in the manosphere. Okay. So prior to KS talking to women, he was talking to men, trying to get them to dress better, to self-improve, all those different types of stuff. He noticed he wasn't really popping off. So he's like, okay, well, I'm going to try something different and talk to women. Appreciate it. Appreciate the subscribe, and if you pass around the stream to a couple people so they could possibly subscribe, listen to the message, it's always appreciated. Like I've said in some other streams, basically, when you guys sub and you like and you share the content, that type of stuff, what you're really doing is for the content creator to really start cranking out the content at a much higher clip and at a much higher quality. I mean, I'm not even joking when I say this. I literally have like 500 topics in my Apple Notes. If I could clone myself right now 500 times, tomorrow I could release 500 videos. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff out there that I'm ready to talk about, but some of that stuff is going to take some time to put together. So KS used to talk to men, trying to give him self-improvement. Let me tie, and I'm going to tie ARC to him a lot of different ways, but I'm going to start this time. So ARC, what happened with KS, okay? So a lot of people naturally, let me explain something. I've done some videos and a lot of people like those videos. See, let me explain something. It really, I'm just going to be completely honest. It really pisses me off when my favorite videos get low views. And then the videos, I'm like, I'm like, okay, no one's going to watch this video. And everyone thinks it's like the most amazing thing they've ever seen. One of those videos that has low views, and it really upset me because it has low views, is the shorts that have to do with Tupac. Go check them out later on. So all you gotta do is spend 60 seconds of your life, 2 minutes if you watch both of them. Go find the shorts that have to do with Tupac. That's a real important message. I got a friend in Panama that I sent those shorts to him. I'm like, okay, review these shorts and that'll fix your problem. So go check them out later on. But basically, KS was looking for the right formula to sit there and pop off, which a lot of let me explain this. A lot of people in the audience have an issue with that. Now, here's the thing. What I would do in terms of the favorite content creators you guys have, what I would sit there and think about, there's a difference between covering different topics and covering stuff from different angles, really analyzing stuff in a real methodical way, versus sitting there and changing up your philosophies. Okay? So it's like, let's say I'm a politician and over there in Virginia, I'm talking about coal. Okay? Coal country. Hey, you know what? We need this stuff for good energy. It's good for our country. Okay? Then I go to Iowa and I'm over there talking about cotton. Okay? Cotton is real important to our country. I'm going to invest some money in farmers, all that type of stuff. The guy is still pretty much in the middle and he's doing okay. He's not really doing anything wrong. He's covering the different topics that's important to different audiences, different parts of the population, and different parts of the country. Now, let me shift back to a Manosphere content creator, and I'll use myself. What's going to happen in the future, because it happens to every content creator, 99% of them, 95% of them, I'll have my day one, some subs, where you're changing up on us. You're switching from how you started. The thing is, if y'all review my video catalog, if y'all review my first videos, my first 50, my first 80 videos, you will notice that I have a very complicated mix of videos. And that's true because my philosophy on women and how I see the world is extremely complicated. Like I've told my friend over there in Panama, I told him a bunch. I've told him and I told him straight up, look, I've never straight up told you to never get married, but it doesn't mean I endorse or encourage people to get married. That's not the same thing, right? So think about that carefully. I won't ever go out of my way to be like, okay, you shouldn't marry. But at the same time, I'm not over here saying, okay, marriage is a good thing, you should do that. You see how that works? At the end of the day, what the point is, when one of these days I'm going to release a video in terms of that has a bunch of how to vet women for marriage and how to get the best outcome, how to protect yourself if you so want to do that. I talked about that the other day. yesterday on that stream that I talk about the primary reason why women act the way they do. Go find it. If you really want to check it out, you got to watch the whole stream and find it because it was a long stream. So I don't know. It's probably around the third and maybe 3 hour mark, something like that, 3.5 hour mark. If you want to really hear my thoughts on that whole marriage type stuff. And it more so focused on vetting women for marriage. Okay. It wasn't all this other stuff like, okay, when you're married to a woman, I'm going to give you marriage counseling. No, no, no. That's not the same thing. We got to think about that carefully. There's a difference. All right. So think about it this way. There's a difference between, vetting men or women for something. In this case, since we're talking about vetting women, there's a difference between teaching guys how to vet women for something versus giving them any kind of counseling when they're already in the middle of that marriage or whatever, or a serious relationship. It's not the same thing. And this relates to talking point number 8 when it comes to Kevin Samuels. So in relation to Kevin Samuels, he started doing a lot of the conversations with women around the summer of 2020, right? And it depends on the part of the country, what month it's going to be, spring or summer. But at the end of the day, May, June, July, around that time period. And it really debatable which were the first streams where he really and truly started going in the direction of having discussions with women. But at the end of the day, the point is around April, May, June, July of 2020. Now, he started having these different conversations. All these women will start calling into a show. And this is where what he was doing was real genius. Now, the guy was very intelligent. The guy was very charismatic. In my personal opinion, I would say that he planned out his streams and his channel to go in the direction that it went. Call it whatever you want to call it. Planning, calculating, all these different words. Doesn't matter. Call it whatever you want to call it. Now, let me explain something. And this is something I really didn't understand until I really and truly started doing content myself. I would always be like, man, there's a bunch of content creators, but you never see them. In other words, the only time you really see them is when they're doing their own streams on their channels. And it took me a while to really figure it out. The thing about it is, when I became a content creator, it made sense. Because especially when you start becoming a bigger name, it's hard to be in these different chats, because the first time, the initial time, or any time you show up in these different chat sections, the first thing people will start doing is start talking shit to you. Your channel is trash, your views are trash, you don't know what you're talking about, all these different things. And it adds a bunch of stress to your life. You just don't see. My thing is, like I've explained to a bunch of people, especially in my personal life, I come to YouTube. I come to YouTube to give my subs that respect what I have to say. I come to YouTube to give them the most elite, accurate information I can give them about female nature and dating, that type of stuff. I don't come to YouTube to sit there and be wasting time and all these different things. My goal is to give the information to the people that really respect what I have to say. Like I've said, a bunch of people, what I've said in a bunch of streams to a bunch of people, what I was saying yesterday, and what I will say a bunch, is the main reason I started my channel is because I felt that there was too much inaccurate information floating throughout the manosphere. I'm like, nah, everything that I've ever experienced with women, after having taken women on hundreds of dates, different women, after having cold approached thousands of women, after having got a body count in the 3 digits, I'm like, nope, there's no way that's true. I don't agree with that. So that's why I started my channel. So here's the point. KS and a bunch of different content creators, they're not, and they weren't, and they currently aren't, and they never will be in the chat sections, because like I said, a lot of people will talk shit to you and do all this different stuff. Now, let me explain what KS would do. And a lot of content creators do this. So they're always in the clouds. Just because they're not typing in the chat, it doesn't mean they're not in the clouds. And what I mean by the clouds is people that don't type anything in the chat. which I have a very hard time avoiding doing it because I like to write paragraphs and I like to express my thoughts in written form. So I have a real hard time staying in the clouds wherever I go. I just have a hard time doing it. But most content creators, they stay in the clouds. Remember, if you're a bigger content creator, this is essentially your job, and your full-time job is to crank out content. So part of your job is to see what's going on around the manosphere and be in different streams. So a lot of these guys that are in the clouds, they don't type anything in the chat ever. They're just they're listening to the stream and they're seeing what's going on. So KS, what he would do, and anyone that claims otherwise, they're being disingenuous. It's not factual. They're capping for someone. They might think KS was their favorite content creator of all time. Okay, cool. He might be, and okay, that's fine, but don't sit there and lie of what that stuff that actually is true, right? So what he would be in the clouds of all these different content creators, and he would quote unquote plagiarize, steal talking points. So here's the problem. You guys that haven't watched that stream, I would go check it out. It's real simple. I think it's like an hour and a half. It talks about the reason content creators are real delicate and they're real emotional. They have emotional ties to their talking points, their unique talking points, their unique knowledge, and other people using it. Some content creators, and I'll summarize that stream real quick, but y'all go check it out. It's like one of the live streams, I don't know, 5 or 6 back. What happens is some guys have an issue with it because other men are getting the credit for knowledge that didn't come from their brain. Okay? Some content creators have an issue with it because other people are monetizing their knowledge. This is a big problem with the female content creators. And I don't really care if someone has an issue with what I'm saying right now. At the end of the day, there's very little original stuff that comes from the female content creators. People can hear that, and I'm going to keep saying it in any streams, and that's just the honest to God truth. I'm going to eventually do a stream that explains why women are incapable, why they have such a hard time coming up with anything original. There's a bunch of different reasons for it. I'm not going to talk about that today, but there's a bunch of different reasons for it. Okay? So this is where things start getting tied together. All these different names, all these different people. Okay, so let's talk about all the different numbers before we get back to KS. Number 1, for you guys that just came in here. Number 1, I talked about Patrice O'Neal, and I talked about Tom Likas. When KS passed away, Tom Likas that's what you get for stealing my stuff, which was some real cruel type stuff, like, okay. I mean, you don't have to take it that far. I mean, come on, man. Okay, yeah, he passed away and you're mad that he was over here using your stuff or whatever, but you don't have to sit there and like basically wish death upon someone. I mean, that's essentially what it is. Okay. ARC, he passed away recently. There's a couple different things that KS would quote unquote plagiarize from ARC. The most infamous and one of the most famous and one of the most elite talking points in the history of the manosphere. I don't care what anyone says. That's exactly what it is. The possibility of sex. Okay. So that is the title of one of his books. So it's basically copyrighted. The thing about it is, this is where things get complicated. If you're KS, if you're a big content creator, how are you going to sit there in a stream and be shouting out every single person that's influenced you? It's not doable. It's not practical. So what are you supposed to do every single stream? Because remember what he used to do, he would do like an hour monologue, and then he would sit there and start having one-on-ones with the females. So you don't even really have that much time period to really be doing that, right? So the next person. So remember what I just said, ARC, Kevin Samuels would use a bunch of his stuff, and that really pissed off ARC. The thing about plagiarizing, let me explain something. So all of us guys, we all know how to write a paper. We went to high school, junior high. So we would have to sit there and cite our sources from other books. So if you're writing a paper, you would have to cite your other sources from other books. The problem with copyright law and a bunch of those different things, copyright law is trying to catch up to the modern era of TikTok and Facebook and all these different platforms of social media. It's having a hard time catching up until it goes through the court systems, up through the district courts, maybe the appellate courts, and maybe eventually to the Supreme Court of the United States. That's going to take a long period of time to eventually go through that process. The problem is, in the meantime, a lot of people are going to be stealing each other's stuff and making money off it. So, a lot of these copyright laws, it's traditionally has been from paper to paper. Okay. So if I write a book and I write such and such, and then someone else writes a book and plagiarizes my book and uses a bunch of stuff from my book in their book, in their written works, I can sue them, and there's a good chance I'm going to win, depending on the level of plagiarism and all that type of stuff. And you guys have heard this before. Basically, if you get caught plagiarizing in your PhD dissertation and that type of stuff, you don't get your PhD. You get kicked out of that college, and you're basically done. That's a big black mark on your record. So it's one of those things that's treated real seriously in academia. But here's the thing. The reason, let me explain something. The reason a lot of content creators are able to do this, because let's say I write a book, or let's use ARC. So he wrote this book, Possibility of Sex, No Free Attention. And essentially, the people that would repeat his stuff, they weren't doing it in book form. They were doing it in a verbal way in different streams, including Just Pearly Things. And I actually called her out in the super chat. So she really and truly can't be sued in any real way because she verbally said the stuff that's from his books. So if you guys notice that I took a bunch of shots at AMS, Alpha Male Strategies, that's one of the main reasons that I took some shots at him, because he did that to Alan Roger Curry. Basically, the guy helped you make you a millionaire, and you couldn't even wish and have respect for his widow and his brother and all these different people. You know what? I feel real bad. I extend my condolences to Miss Curry and the son and then the brother, because what's interesting about ARC, and he discussed it a bunch. The thing about ARC, he talked about how he never really thought to write a book on this stuff, but his brother was like, your process, your philosophy on how you deal with women and how you get laid is just so elite and so exceptional. You need to write a book. You need to put your thoughts in a book and release it. So imagine how he felt when his brother passed away and ARC would hang out with him and drink a beer or whatever. And yeah, it pisses me off because this was years ago when they had a bunch of beef. So ARC would be with his brother. Yeah, I'm having another argument with AMS because he jacked my shit. And his brother would be like, man, I see what you're saying, but there's not much you can do about it. Just keep working hard and crank out more videos. So basically the point is, when ARC passed away, it would have been something that helped ARC's family, his brother, his widow. It would have helped them have more closure, because that's the thing about ARC. It goes back to the whole thing about why people have an issue with being plagiarized. With him, it wasn't so much about money, it was more so about the respect factor. And I'm going to talk about this maybe in a couple weeks, but he said it himself. But I'm going to talk about his philosophy. I'm going to really break it down in a real heavy way. I wanted, if anything, it was really sad that he passed away at the time he did. It would have been an honor to do a collab with him and interview him, and I'll never be able to do that. So it's really disappointing. So let's keep moving on. In terms of Tommy Sotomayor, because we're gonna jump 3 and 4. Tommy Sotomayor, he had a bunch of issues. He still kind of takes shots at Kevin, even though he passed away. So Tommy Sotomayor, basically, Kevin Samuels would call him to a show, but Tommy Sotomayor didn't know this, and he didn't remember this because he would take so many calls from so many different people. But Tommy, eventually, he had some of his hardcore supporters be like, yeah, don't you remember that Kevin used to call into your show? And Tommy was like, I don't know who you're talking about, which it was probably true, because everyone's small at some point. right? So Kevin was probably still on the rise. He hadn't popped off in a real big way, maybe at 20K subs. He was at 40K subs. So maybe in really and truly, Tommy Sotomayor didn't know who he was. But what they started telling Tommy, his supporters, yeah, that guy Kevin used to call into your show. And then what some of his supporters did, they went to find the clips where Kevin was admiring the work from Tommy Sotomayor. Now, the big thing that really started pissing off Tommy is when it comes to the different respect factor and the talking points, people would come back and tell him, well, you're still in Kevin Samuels stuff. And Tommy's like, well, what the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, Kevin said that on this broadcast, and then you said it 20 days later. And Tommy would say, no, that shit originally came from me. I just happened to repeat it again, right? So Tommy Sotomayor, he had talked about that stuff. Let's put that in perspective. So Tommy had talked about it in 2021. And no, not 2021. I'm sorry, 2011. So 2011, 2012, 2014, that type of stuff. Kevin would be in this broadcast, and he would hear all the different things that Tommy had to say, and then he would incorporate that stuff in his own talking points in his own show. So when Tommy Sotomayor, let's go to the next one, and we'll circle back around to him a little bit. Number 6, Rollo Tomasi, Rational Male. He took some shots at Kevin Samuels as well when he passed away, basically saying like, oh, you know, you're over here using my talking points as well, and I never really called you out when you were living, but right now I'm gonna say, you know, you were stealing some of my shit. And I think he was more polite about it than Tom Likas, but at the end of the day, that's what he did. Okay, now we're gonna really focus on number 8. I had to sit there and tie in all these talking points to the final, the main event, so all this stuff could make sense. So, like I was saying, Kevin Samuels started popping off in the summer of 2020. The infamous Average at Best video. That came about in December of 2020. So, basically, more or less 6 months after he started talking to women. More or less 6-7 months. Now, I was in that stream that day, which was really, I don't know, it was really weird. Let me explain what happened, because a lot of people don't really understand what happened when it comes to the Average at Best. Obviously, like anyone in this stream or anyone that hears the stream, they could just go watch the video, but they wouldn't really understand the whole behind the scenes stuff that happened. In other words, the stars aligned in a real complicated way for that thing to go viral. Now, at the end of the day, would another stream of his gone viral another moment? Yeah, of course. But it doesn't mean it would have gone to the level that it did, and it might have taken longer, 6 months, a year. We wouldn't be where we are today, is what I would say. It would have taken a little bit longer. Or let's say Fresh and Fit had surpassed them. They were kind of neck and neck for a long period of time in terms of influence and clout and subs. And it's complicated because it depends on what age group and all the different things or how you measure clout. But what happened that night, because he would do his show from around 8 o'clock, 7:30 at night to about 10:30 at night, something like that, evening to not super late at night, but like 10:30 or whatever. And he would do this segment where he would do overtime. So if people hit the Cash App and they toss in some money, he would do more time on the stream. So like, share, subscribe. If you're so inclined, hit the Cash App. It's on the top, pinned to the top of the stream on YouTube. So Kevin had traveled to LA. He was staying in Atlanta. He was living in Atlanta. So he went to the business trip over there on the West Coast, and he didn't even really want to take the trip. Now, he never really mentioned what he had to go for, but he didn't really want to take the trip. So let's think about it. He just jumped a bunch of time zones, and he jumped all the way to LA. So he's in a hotel. He has a more simple setup. basically stuff that he carried in a suitcase. He didn't have his full setup. And the woman that calls in, Miss Average at Best, like she said in the video, is that she was normally asleep, that she didn't catch a show because she would normally be asleep when you went live, right? Depending on the time zone that she was in. So Kevin, one of the things I really respect about Kevin, and this is how I'm going to run my channel, because I agree with his philosophy and I agree with the logic behind it. You know, I want to keep these streams real concise. I don't want there to be a bunch of blabber. I know you guys live busy lives. A lot of you guys are married or whatever. You have kids. You got a bunch of things going on in your life. What I would tell you, get YouTube Premium. With YouTube Premium, you can listen to YouTube in the background while you do something else in your phone, e-commerce or write emails, whatever. That's what I would tell you guys. But even then, it doesn't mean you can listen to YouTube all day. But the point remains, I'm trying to keep the stuff concise. This stream was really, really important. So this one's extending out further. But this isn't going to be a common thing where we're going to 3 hours or whatever. But the point is, when it comes to KS and it comes to that female, what he would do on shows, he would have a topic of the stream, right? And when women called in, they had to pretty much stay on topic. And if they started going off topic, he would put them back on topic or eventually kick them off if the conversation wasn't going anywhere. Now, the thing about it is, he was really exceptional. I mean, it was really amazing thing to see. He would continue to talk to women if it was going in a direction that was actually worth listening to. He rarely messed up when it came to that stuff. So things were going in the right direction with Average at Best. And eventually, there was the viral moment. So he asked her to rate herself, and she rated herself. She basically called herself average, a 6. I think the number she gave was a 6. And she talked about her history with men, talking about how, you know, the last guy, the guy that's the father of the kid, how he was a bum or a drug dealer or something like that. And Kevin always had this line. He would say, when you get a new boyfriend or a new husband, you shouldn't expect a guy that's way better than the first guy that you got pregnant by. So in other words, it's like, okay, you got pregnant by the drug dealer at age 19, and then at 29, you're expecting a guy that's a doctor. And you guys that aren't familiar with Kevin Samuels' content, that's really and truly what a bunch of the women expected. Now, that was the thing about it. This is what made things so brilliant. If you guys notice on the Average at Best video, you guys have to go review that video. The guy was just, I didn't really notice it when it went down. I've seen the stream like 3 or 4 times, but the first couple of times I didn't really notice it. But the guy was vicious with the mute button. It was almost like a cobra that was striking. So he's sitting there having the conversation with her, and she's saying, and he says something that he really didn't like, and you just see the cobra strike of him muting her. And then he says the infamous line about average at best. So you got to think about all the different events that had to take place. So he had to be in California. She had to be in another time zone, and she had to be awake in order to, you know, all the different things to line up. She was off topic. He honored the call, and he talks about it. Well, I don't really want to have this conversation because you're not on topic. He's like, okay, well, we're going to do it. Whatever. We're going to do it. His instincts or whatever told him, okay, we're going to have this conversation. And then the moment, you got to remember, his streams were like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So when you got a little guy, a little nerd over there at WorldStar, the guy had to sit there and clip the proper clip that was going to go viral. So Kevin had to be in the right spot in LA. This girl had to be awake that particular night, because remember, she'd usually be asleep. She didn't know he was going to be in LA. There's no way for her to know that. She just happened to check on YouTube like, whoa, what's going on? Kevin is live. I don't understand what's going on. And then he starts his monologue. Oh, okay, well, he's in LA. That makes sense. And then she calls off topic. He honors the call, and he sits there and has a conversation with her. Okay, so he's in the right place. She's in a different time zone. She happens to be awake. A guy from World Star, he's like, man, I like this clip. I think this has potential to go viral. Okay, I'm going to choose this clip. So I'm going to choose this clip out of endless dozens of videos, that particular clip. I'm going to upload it with the right title. And you guys are probably thinking like, you're thinking too hard. No, you know, once you're a content creator, if you ever do it, you understand what I'm saying. Any little thing could really make your video go viral. It could be the time of day that you sit there and you put it on YouTube. It could be a bunch of things. The title, the thumbnail. It could be someone in the clouds that you have no idea is following you. It could be a major rapper. The major rapper shares it with his followers on Instagram. It takes off that way. It could be a certain word. It can be a certain emotional thing that a lot of people connect with that really makes it go viral. It could be a bunch of complicated things, and a lot of the things that you can't really control. So that guy at World Star, he picked out that clip. He uploaded it at a particular time period, and it took off. Now, here's the thing about Kevin. When that clip went viral, he took a couple of days off. He's like, I need some time off. I need to really sit there and strategize and plan out what I'm going to do with this clip and where I'm going to take this channel. Now he has a bunch of pressure, right? Overnight, 20K or 30K or 40K more subs, whatever it was. And now there's a bunch more pressure on him. So here's the thing. When it comes to that type of stuff, when he returned to do his first stream, he said, you know what? I've gone mini viral, quote unquote, mini viral in the past, semi-viral in the past, but this time was different. This time, it was clear that it wasn't about my name. It wasn't about the content creator. It was something bigger going on in society, which is why the clip popped off so much. It wasn't like, okay, the other clips, the first ones, the mini viral ones, it was like, okay, Kevin Samuels, he had something interesting to say. Okay, it went viral a little bit. 200K views, whatever. But the last one, the average at best, it wasn't like Kevin Samuels and average at best. It was more so like average at best, and it didn't really matter who the content creator was. That was the point that he was making. So we're getting to the main event. You got to really sit here and tie all this stuff together for this stuff to make sense, because you guys got to remember the subs and the people that listen to my streams. You got to remember there's a bunch of people that are coming to the Manosphere that don't understand the workings and the behind the scenes and the history of the Manosphere. And even if someone's been in here in the space, they still haven't heard this stuff, so they want to hear the breakdown. So average at best, that was in December 2020. Fresh and Fit, their viral moment was March 2021, which was 3 months later. Okay, so that viral moment had to do with this feminist called Amanda. So basically there was Amanda and these two other women, and there was a bunch of people in that studio. Kevin was not in that studio. He was not in person in that studio. There was a bunch of people. If you look up the video, there was a bunch of people in that studio, a bunch of different men. If I recall correctly, I think Rollo was in there, Rollo Tomasi, Donovan Sharp was in there. And then Fresh and Fit, they were sitting in their normal chairs. Now, what started happening later on, the people in the chat, they would tell Myron and Fresh, let's get Kevin to call in here. Let's text Kevin so he can call into the show. And Myron started getting pissed off. Don't ever tell me to sit there and text Kevin. I can sit here and handle this on my own. I don't need Kevin. If you say Kevin one more time, I'm gonna ban you from the channel. So he started tripping on his chat, because they would say, call Kevin so he can handle these women. Because remember, Myron and Fresh, they had to build a shield around them, and they were still in the beginning of the infancy of their channel, and they weren't, I'm gonna call it for what it is. They weren't ready for prime time. That's just really what it's about. So remember, Kevin Samuels had already been doing this type of information for, and basically manosphere related stuff, female nature. He'd been doing it for about 9 months. Okay. Remember, he'd always be in the clouds. He'd been in the clouds for 4 or 5 years. So he was sitting there absorbing all the different information from all these different content creators. So yeah, Tommy Sotomayor, he was more so, much more popular around the years 2010, 2011, all those different years. It doesn't mean that he wasn't sit there and he still wasn't cranking out good content, which he was. Doesn't really matter. So Kevin would be in the clouds for 4 or 5 years, and he was absorbing everything. In other words, Kevin, he was way ahead of the curve when it came to this stuff. Kevin was like, when Average at Best took off, he was like essentially, let me put this in perspective. He was essentially in the NBA already. He was like a rookie. He was a rookie in the NBA. Okay, he's not going to average 29 points, but he's going to contribute. He's going to score 3 points a game or whatever. And him being in the NBA in itself, that was really impressive. So, in other words, if you would have put Kevin up against a lot of Manosphere content creators at that point in time, it would have been a close debate. Kevin might not have won, but it would, and I'm talking about people that came before him. He might not have won those debates if they ever took place, which they really didn't for the most part, but he would have held his own. There's some other behind the scenes stuff where Kevin, some old school, you guys that haven't really been around for a while, Kevin did have some debates on panels, on some back streams, on some channels that some people, they don't really go over there. Those streams are real classics if you really know where to look. One of these days, I'm going to review some of them. But one time, Kevin, and we're about to get to the main event. We're working our way up to it. So we're going to talk about one of those streams that happened behind the scenes at a more smaller level. But when it comes to the knowledge, KS was already in the NBA. He was essentially a rookie. Fresh and Fit, I would say they were bench players at a D1 school. D1, okay, they might be over there at Duke, but they're not starters. They're not averaging 20 points a game. They're not going to the NBA for sure. They were a bench player. Okay, they were good enough to get into a D1 school in terms of their sports ability and their ability to shoot the ball and cross over people and all that. But they weren't ready for prime time. So they weren't ready for prime time, and they had Rolo, they had Donovan Sharp, they had a bunch of people backing them up that had been in the Manosphere much longer. So Kevin called into the show, and he roasts the feminist, and he really smokes her using a bunch of different logic that had traditionally been part of the Manosphere that had been developed over the span of basically 2 decades. Some people would even say 25 years. Some people, it's debatable. In terms of the way I feel about it, I would put it around 25 years, 23, 24 years. I would count it from 2023 to about the late 1990s, where ARC released his first book, which was Mode 1, his first edition, around 1999. Tom Likas and Pratish O'Neill, the comedian, they really and truly did contribute a bunch to the rhetoric of the Manosphere and the thought process and the sit there and the rhetoric and that type of stuff. But I can't put him ahead of Alan Roger Curry. I just can't do it. So I would say, from my perspective, late 90s, ARC was really and truly the beginning, from my perspective, in a real way, of the Manosphere. And then obviously now we're in 2023. So KS roasted the feminist, and Fresh and Fit started taking off. Their channel really started blowing up. Okay? Now, this is where we start getting to the main event. Over the years, all the different years you see on the banners, and you guys that just popped up in the stream, you guys can watch the playback and see the whole logic tie together. Just play it on 1.5x speed, and you'll be able to watch the stream, and it won't be 3 hours, right? It will be faster because you have it on 1.5x speed. So KS, we're going to talk about him because the reason he's more so the focus of the stream, here's the thing. You guys are able to see the title of the stream, and I was talking about in the title how KS was able to, quote unquote, trick women into the Manosphere and all these different discussions. They basically became these little experiments of the red pill, confirming a lot of the stuff we've always been saying for a long period of time. So Kevin brought him in, and they didn't even realize they were in the manosphere, they didn't even realize they were part of these conversations that men have been having for 2 decades or 25 years, however you want to count it. I already told you where I consider the beginning of the manosphere. And the thing about it is, now, here's why I can't include Fresh and Fit, even though they popped off pretty soon after KS. I can't include those guys, and I can't include any of these other podcasts, whenever or whatever, and all these other things, just pearly things, because these women already understand the lingo, the lexicon. They understand. I don't want to say they understand red pill. It's a lot of them. They just parrot the talking points of the manosphere that's developed over the past 25 years, and they just sit there and parrot the points of men. But at the end of the day, women understand when they're going to these broadcasts and these different studios. They have a decent understanding of what the red pill is all about. They understand that they're joining these conversations where men are trying to sit there and really break down the logic and female nature. And the thing about it is, they know where they are, whether they understand they're either directly in the middle of the manosphere or they're on the peripherals. The whatever podcast, what a lot of these podcasts are doing, if you guys haven't noticed, there's a bunch of big channels around the world on YouTube that never talked about dating, relationships, female nature, and all this junk. But what they're doing is they're rebranding. So because they already have 500K subs, it's just an easy transition. You already have a bunch of subs, and you just sit there and transition to manosphere content. And okay, a bunch of people, your subs, are going to abandon you because they're like, what the fuck? This is supposed to be a gaming channel. I want to sit there and watch you do jumps through, I don't know, through hoops or some crap. And now you're over here talking about manosphere and all this trash. Like, what the fuck is this? But remember, these channels are very big, so they don't have to sit there and maintain a lot of their subs to have a successful channel. All they got to do is retain a percent of it, 10%, 20%, and they still have a successful channel. And that's not even really happening because manosphere is quote unquote trending, in the words of this one content creator who I don't really care for. So the thing about it is, like I was saying, women were brought into these conversations with KS, and they didn't really understand that they were a part of the manosphere, that they were basically guinea pigs. So, and I hate to use that phrase, but that's what they were. So these guinea pigs, they were calling in to a show, Kevin Samuels, and they were confirming a bunch of the stuff that the manosphere has been saying for a long period of time. Now, what Kevin said on one of these back channels, he's like, I mean, you guys got to understand. And I had that discussion with another content creator, and I basically had it on his panel, and I knew that essentially that Kevin was in the clouds, and he heard what I had to say. So basically what I said is, Kevin has to keep the manosphere and the red pill at a distance. He can't be sitting there associating with certain elements of the manosphere. Barack Obama, President Obama, he did the same thing with Reverend Wright. If you guys don't know who I'm talking about, just Google it and you'll see why he kept him at a distance. When you're running for president, when you're a major politician, okay, you might be friends with such and such dude, but the guy's been dealing drugs for 20 years and you're running for, I don't know, for the Senate. You can't sit there and be seen with them in public. You see how that works? So in the words of Kevin, he was doing the red pill stuff in a more corporate, roundabout way. Now, let's really break down the conversations he would have with these women, and let's talk about the brilliance with these conversations. Because if you sit there and you think about it, what Kevin would do, and I talked about this a little bit the other day, I talked about how Kevin would start having these conversations, and he's like, he would tell all these women, okay, I'm not going to, if you want a high value man, I'm not going to sit there and challenge what you want. I'm not going to say, okay, if a woman wants a guy that makes 200K and a big house and a mansion and all that stuff, he would allow them to have those standards. But there was almost a form of manipulation and the brilliance behind it. So by not really challenging the women on that type of stuff, he would sit there and punk them in a different way. Okay, you want a rich guy? What are you going to do to get him? Okay, you want a guy that is a doctor? What are you going to do to meet his standards? Okay, you have your standards as a female, which is female nature 101. Think about the logic. Female nature 101, one of the principles of female nature 101 is that a lot of women think they're doing you a favor if you deal with them. because historically, a very high percentage of women, over 90%, have reproduced. Historically, roundabouts 40 to 50% of men have reproduced. Now, you got to remember, a lot of people are going to listen to those statistics later on. They're going to be like, that's not true. We're over here in the United States. No, no, no. We're not talking about just the United States. We're talking about just in general throughout civilizations, throughout world history. We're talking about a lot of the different countries that are extremely dangerous over there in Central America, all these different parts of the world where the lifespan is much less years, right? The life expectancy. So it starts becoming a complicated breakdown. So think about what he was basically telling them. Okay, you have expectations. You want a guy that's in the top 1%, top 5%. And he was really nice about it. What he was really saying in a roundabout way, well, you're not top 5%, so why do you deserve top 1% of man? And like a lot of people, it's one of those things. See, here's the problem when it comes to this stuff. And I said this the other day. Women want men to accept their nature, which is their want for security, resources, and when they're in their younger years, they want good genes, quote unquote good genes. So they want to quote unquote deal with Chad. We're not going to get in that Chad discussion today, but they have an issue. They have a problem with accepting male nature, because there's male nature as well. We always talk about female nature, but male nature exists as well. And then that's the things where it would start falling apart for the women. Okay, you got your expectations of men. You want a rich guy and you want all this stuff because you're older. I mean, let's just call it for what it is. I'm not being a dick. I'm not being a jerk. Shout out to Platinum Elite. He has talked about it as well, and I know there's some people in my sub count that watches his stuff and goes over there. I go over there all the time. I have a wrench over there with my other channel, my just general, regular channel, audience type channel. But at the end of the day, what he was saying, what a lot of guys say is the truth. Women in their early 20s, women in their so-called prime, beautiful women without kids, they're not the ones that would be calling into a show. It was the women in their 30s, women that had kids by different dudes. And what essentially he would sit there and corner them. Okay, but he would basically say in a roundabout way, and he would sit there and question them in a way where they would box themselves in the corner, and they would be bitter because they would have to basically, whether they wanted to admit it or not, they would sit there and basically box themselves in a corner and be like, concede the point that they're not top 5%. Okay, so you want a top 5% man, a doctor, and then Kevin would ask the right questions, and he would sit there and logically box them in the corner where they had no real choice but to admit they're not top 5% by the standards of what men want, right? The fertility, a woman that's younger, beautiful, a woman that's fit. And it goes back to, the reality is a lot of these women, when it comes to this conversation, which is something he never really said and a lot of people don't say, the reason a lot of these women, they do understand that men want a younger woman that doesn't have kids. But what they essentially try to do, or they want to do, is they want to quote unquote buy one of these type of quote unquote higher value men with their accomplishments, with their degrees, all this stuff. And the reason they quote unquote are trying to convince these guys that stuff matters, because they know deep down that they're not attractive enough to get one of these type of guys. Does that make sense? So if there's a woman that's a quote unquote 6 and she's over here swinging for the fences, and she's been seeing it for the past 10, 15 years, real beautiful women getting doctors and getting guys that own all these corporations, she knows deep down that she can't compete on the looks level. So it's almost like she's over there trying to hoodwink one of these men and be like, okay, well, I'll just buy him. I'll buy him with my degrees. I'll buy him with my accomplishments. I don't have the looks for it, so I don't have much of a choice. And what would piss him off is Kevin would sit there and just logically break it down. Like, I mean, you can sit there and try to lead with all that different stuff. That's not really working out for you because men want these different things. And where Kevin was real vicious about it is he would sit there anytime the women would try to shift in a different direction. He would be vicious. If you go listen to his videos, and you don't even have to do that. If you go over there to his catalog of videos and you glance up and down of his different catalog and you scroll up and down, you'll see High Value Man who knows how many times, hundreds of times. So by focusing on being having a pathological obsession and really beating down that concept into the floor, he was pandering to women's obsession with getting financial security as they get older. The other thing I was talking about the other day, I was also talking about, if you go through his catalog, because I didn't watch every single video, but I did see a good chunk, 30%, who knows what it was. What you would notice, it was rare. I'm not saying it never happened. That's not what I'm saying. But let's say he had a 1,000 conversations. So 1,000 conversations with 1,000 women. In those conversations, maybe 10%, no more than 20% of the time would looks come up, sexual attraction. And when women would try to talk about that stuff, he would say, well, marriage is not about good sex and all this stuff. It's about, financial security, and it's about building a legacy. So when these women that were 32, 37, when they would try, and it wasn't that often, most of them would focus on the high value man concept. When they would sit there and try to shift the conversation to, okay, well, I want the complete package, Kevin would sit there and be vicious and moving the conversation back to the high value man concept. Okay, you need to get a doctor. Okay, you want to get a doctor? This is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to work out. Okay, you have a kid? Well, you're going to have to work out 21 times a day. He was pandering. All these people are always talking about how other content creators are real panders. Let me tell you who's one of the most ultimate panders in the history of the internet. You know who it was? It was him. He was pandering to women, especially older women's pathological obsession with getting a guy that has resources. So he was pandering in an indirect way. And it never occurred to a bunch of people why he was pandering. A lot of the guys, like myself, we would sit there and we'd be listening to these streams and we would be like, these women don't really realize what's going on. They really and truly didn't get it. Now, it's like women have seen what's going on in the manosphere. But back then, they weren't really seeing what was going on. They were getting the carrot floated out there in their face, the carrot being the high value man. What are you going to do to get the carrot? You're going to jump through hoops to get it? But these women, they didn't understand they were basically guinea pigs in the manosphere. They didn't realize they were in the manosphere. They didn't realize that most of the time they sounded the same. It was like the same thing over and over and over and over again. And that happens with Fresh and Fit. The same thing over and over and over and over again. And you know why it happens over and over and over again? Some people would say, well, they ask the same questions. That's why they get the same answers. No, they could change the questions to other pillars of the manosphere and female nature. The same result would happen. The result, regardless if the questions were a little different, other aspects of female nature, it would still essentially be the same results because in general, female nature is generally true across the board. In general, there's some nuances, and I'm going to talk about that some other day. Yes, there's some nuances, a hypergamy, depending on the culture, depending on the races, depending on the socioeconomic status you're dealing with, depending on the relative wealth of the country that you're in, third world, emerging economy. Just because a woman settles down in Brazil or wants to settle down at age 22 or 23, and that is actually the average age of settling down. Remember, we're talking in hypothetical, and that doesn't mean that's actual the year, the average age of a woman that settles down. I'm explaining it in comparison to the United States. But let's say it's 22 over there in Brazil. Now, just because they're settling down at a younger age, it does not mean women in those countries aren't as vicious in judging men's looks as the United States and the West. Now, it wouldn't be to the level of the United States, but it would still be fairly high. But they don't have the luxury of, okay, well, I'm going to wait out to get the deluxe man, age 35. I better settle down at a younger age because there's a bunch of cartel members over here slanging coke over here in Honduras. So I don't have the luxury of being so vicious and judging men's looks. You see how the logic makes sense? At the end of the day, the point is, in general, the principles in terms of female nature, it's generally true, just like it's generally true about male nature. Every man that will ever be a sub of my channel, if I were to tell them, hey, would you love to run through 90 dime piece women? And they'd be like, yeah, man, of course. Yeah. They'd be shaking their head like up and down. And yeah, they'd be like, and it doesn't really matter what the percentage is, 90%, 80%, 75%. It would be a really high percentage. And the reason is because men are just, in general, we're just fascinated by beauty. It's just, that's what we're naturally biologically programmed that way. Now, the thing about it is, what I have said in some of my streams, I've said, once you've dealt with enough women, you become more so immune to beauty. And I've had that conversation a bunch of times with my friend in Panama. And I'm not being a jerk when I say this to, my subs, anyone who watches this stream in the future. All I'm saying is there's a decent chance, and I'm being real diplomatic with using that word, decent chance, more so like there's a very good chance that if you have a pathological obsession with the concept of dime pieces, there's a very good chance you don't have that much experience with women, because once you've been on so many dates with different women and slept with so many women, code approached so many women, it's just like, she's just another female. If you deal with this woman, she might cause you a bunch of issues. Now, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying for sure that a beautiful woman is going to automatically make your life difficult. That's not what I said. I'm just saying in general, you got to have a real elite understanding of female nature and have a bunch of experience with women to be able to navigate those different aspects of female nature in relation to beautiful women. So let me summarize the stream. Let me summarize it one more time. And then I'm going to answer Nino's question if he's in here. I'll talk about it here in a little bit, the Bone Thugs and Harmony thing. Talk about it for 10 minutes, but let me summarize this stream, the main talking points. So the title of the stream is, how was all these different things, how was Kevin Samuels able to quote unquote trick? How was he able to trick women into coming into this space and having these conversations? Well, the answer is because he was pandering to what they really want. He had a very exceptional understanding of female nature, and he was sitting there feeding the steaks to the different pit bulls, knowing very well at a very elite level what those women wanted at the particular age bracket that they were in. He had a great understanding of the different things going on in our society, social media. He had been listening to these conversations for half a decade in the manosphere, and it doesn't really matter if he was on the panels and really going to war with different people on the panels, which he did do it on some kind of level. but he didn't even really have to do as much. All he had to do was be in the clouds, listen to the arguments, listen to the discussions, and sit there. Okay, I agree. No, I don't. Okay, yes, I agree with that. And the thing about it is, what these females didn't understand is he had all these elite talking points in his back pocket that had been developed over the span of 20, 25 years. Not just the content creators, but people like myself that have been in and around the manosphere for about a decade. So there would be the content creators, and then there would be the quote unquote peons in the chat sections. We'd sit there and critique the content creators. We'd sit there and debate each other as to if such and such thing was true about women. No, that's not true. No, you don't know what you're talking about. No, we got to correct this. No, we got to correct that. And all those things were finely tuned. And Kevin showed up for game time when he started having these topics, discussing them with women. And what these women didn't understand is he had all this information in his computer. There's a reason he was so able to have these conversations in real time in such a crisp, logical, advanced manner. As soon as one of these women started going into one of these oceans, he would already have the talking point in the back of his mind, and he would be bringing it to the front of his mind, and he would crank that stuff out at a vicious clip. Okay, this woman is saying that. Kevin's brain, he would sit there, search for the information. Okay, I remember this was developing in 2013. His brain would search for it in the computer hard drive. He would pull that information from that part of the hard drive. And then, for a lack of better phrase term, he would smoke the different women when they really try to come at him with some bullshit. One of the ones that's most annoying to me, like I said, one of the most elite content creators in the world. I don't care what anyone says. That's who it is, and that's what it is. There's a reason Dr. Phil was trying to get him on his channel. The guy has a PhD. I know he's retired. He left the show, whatever. But Sandman, I highly recommend you guys go subscribe to Sandman. But he has a video like that. It's a common phrase that a lot of women use to try to deflect from what is generally true. The goal is to sit there and knock the conversation off the rails of what you're talking about. And you're over here winning the argument in a real logical way. And it doesn't really matter how you're doing it, whether it's with stats or things that really make a bunch of logical sense. It's a deflection from the argument of what's going on. So, like I was saying, to summarize, that's how Kevin was able to, quote unquote, trick women into the manosphere, because historically, these conversations amongst men in the manosphere, they have more so been about women. They weren't talking to women. Kevin was the first major content creator that actually was discussing these things with women. But it never really occurred to them in the beginning that they were in the middle of red pill conversations. They were both, in particular woman, they were in a little silo, and he was already had the information in his back pocket of the red pill, and he would weaponize all that knowledge and stuff developed over the span of 25 years. He would weaponize it against them to win the arguments and to really break them down. Now, the thing about it is, had they been young women with no kids, age 20, 21, 22, it might have been a little bit of a different story. There's a couple different women he had some issues with, Nicki Minaj, Brittany Renner. See, the thing is, when you have such a high status and you're so beautiful, certain caliber of women, there's certain arguments like other content creators, shout out to them in the Black Manosphere, Ramel, Thai City. and that stuff doesn't work with certain caliber women. But he would have actually had the advantage in other ways because they're younger and they hadn't have that much experience of what's going on in the world. Kind of the women that Fresh and Fit deal with. So there you go. That's how he was able to trick women to come into this space. So you still in here, Nino? I'll talk about the Bone Thugs and Harmony thing real quick for 10-15 minutes, and I'm gonna close the stream. Appreciate the compliment, Mr. Friendly. Hopefully y'all sharing the stream, like, share, subscribe. If you like what you hear, every once in a while, toss a couple dollars into the Cash App. You guys see the Cash App pinned at the top of the stream. So what's up, Nino? You still in here? I'll give you 4 minutes to ask me the question about Bone Thugs, or to show that you're still in here. I don't know, say okay, or say, I don't know, put some letter. So he says, I think Crazy Bone will. He's heavy on YouTube. I got to Silver Spring, Maryland for their next show. He follows fans. Hey man, do me a big favor. Okay, well, I guess you're traveling right now. But the thing about it is that stream, basically what he's talking about, I don't know if he's still in here, but let me summarize it real quick. You guys watched the whole video. So basically, I went to a concert with my friend, a guy friend in San Antonio. I met this girl. I met this girl at the concert, and I told her, hey, let's go to the concert tomorrow. Let's go to Austin the very next day. I was like, she's like, okay, whatever, let's go. So we go to the concert, and this is Female Nature 101. A lot of the guys in this space, they assume if a man has status or top tier, quote unquote, Chad looks, or he's over there printing money, he's worth $2 million, that all women, ALL, are going to automatically sleep with the guy. That's what they assume. That's what they think. That's their theories, not mine, their theories, their ideas. So what happened is, I watched the concert with the girl, and she's like, well, let's go to the back. Let's go to the back, and I want to, talk to Bone Thugs. I've seen Bone Thugs and Harmony live like 12 times. So I was like, I took the woman on a date. So I was like, okay, whatever. I've already hung out with him before, all the different stuff. But okay, I'm trying to show her a good time. Let's go. So we go to the back, and Wishbone hits on her. Wishbone, remember, she's not my girlfriend. She's not my wife. She's a woman that I was taking on the first date. So the way I handled it is I did nothing. So Wishbone's like, hey, you know what? We're about to smoke, drink a little Henny, and get blunted. You want to go back to the hotel? And I'm just standing there. I'm like, man, this is Female Nature in person, like right before my eyes. Here's a guy. He has money, a bunch of money, tens of millions of dollars. This guy has obviously status. One of the greatest hip hop groups of all time in the history of rap, and really one of the greatest groups of all time in any genre of music. Recorded with Biggie, recorded with Tupac. They got brought into the game with Eazy-E. Eazy-A, one of the founders of NWA. A lot of the pillars to establish hip hop were established by him. So now, this is from the logic of black pillars, from Wheat Waffles. Not me, but them. What they would say is, well, but that guy is overweight. That particular member of Bone Thugs and Harmony, Wishbone, which is true. So the guy didn't have looks, money, status. He didn't have all three. So what you're saying doesn't really make sense, and we're not gonna talk about it. No. Some of those guys, even if a guy that they're talking in reference to a guy, in their eyes, even if he just has one of the threes, but he's maxed out in one of those threes, like he has quote unquote Chad looks, like he's a 10 out of 10 in terms of guys looks, that he's automatically going to be running through all these women. Or if a guy is rich, the guy is rich, forget about the other two. Let's say he's, way out of shape and he doesn't have status, but if he's just super rich, that he's going to be running through dime pieces. Or if the other one, Forget about, because the thing about status, the status one is real interesting. Just because you have money, it doesn't mean you have status. And just because you have status, it doesn't mean you have money. You could I could sit here, I could release a video tomorrow and it goes viral, and I could have 200K subs, and a lot of women would be impressed by it. They'd be like, "Oh, that guy has a bunch of followers." But I wouldn't be making any money off that videos, because it takes a while for YouTube to pay that money out. So, okay, yeah, I have 200K subs, but I just started my channel. So that doesn't mean I'm over here with $500,000. You see how that works? Anyways, Wishbone, the guy has money, status, tens of millions of dollars. Guy has status, looks in the eyes of wheat waffles and all those dudes. Well, he's overweight and he's not attractive, so it doesn't count. Whatever. So I'm standing there, and Wishbone tries to take her back to his hotel. Let's go drink some Henny and get blinded. Now, according to those clowns, she automatically went. She left me in the dust, and she went to go deal with the member, one of the most infamous, famous groups in the world. That's not what happened. She didn't go to sleep with Wishbone. Now, I'm going to finish the story, and then I'm going to end the stream. Now, a lot of the guys in the chat, the people that hear the stream, they'll be like, well, okay, but that means at least you got laid, right? Because there's about an hour distance between Austin and San Antonio. So I was like, well, we've been drinking, and I told her ahead of time, like, we're gonna stay at a hotel. I'm not going to be driving back to San Antonio. We're gonna stay in a hotel in Austin. And she's like, okay. So we stay in the hotel, and you know what happened? She didn't let me smash either. And I obviously have better looks than him. I mean, I'm not trying to sit here and be rating dudes' looks and all this bullshit, but I'm just explaining from an obvious perspective. I'm in much better shape than him. So there you go. What's interesting? What do? We sat there and covered all three: looks, money, status. That dude covered money and status. I covered the looks. Obviously, I'm a different human being than he is, and none of us got laid. She's like, the next day, well, I want to see you again, but I know we didn't smash last night, but I got to get to know you better, and maybe that'll happen in the future. I never hung out with her again because I wasn't living in San Antonio. So even if I wanted to see her again, I was like, nah, I'm not making the effort to go drive over there. What's going on? What's going on, buddy? Haven't seen you in a while. Nice to see you. Hopefully things are going well over there. I'm about to end the stream, but I'll talk to you for 5 minutes. The stream has been going on for 3 hours, so I'm about to end it in 5 minutes. But hopefully you've been doing okay. Well, over here, we did a real important stream. Been wanting to do it for a long period of time. Today was a good time to do it. I wanted to wait for like 6 months or a year to do it. I don't know. I just felt like doing it today. So you guys that just came in here, please like, share, subscribe. Like, share, subscribe. And if you're so inclined, hit the Cash App. What I would say, you guys that just popped in here, you missed a real good stream in live action. So what I would do is I would start from the beginning. And I would do what I would tell y'all to do: get YouTube Premium if you don't already have it. Which what you can do with that is you can basically lock your phone, or you can sit there and go work out, or you can be on a different part of the phone. You can be shopping on Amazon or texting your girlfriend, and you can still be listening to YouTube in the background. In other words, you can listen and deal with the phone in two different ways. And then the other thing I would say, I didn't know this for a long period of time, on your stream, you can sit there and change the speed of the stream. So you can change it to 1.5x or 2.0x, 1.25x. So ideally, I would listen to my stream maybe at 1.5x. I do talk a little bit faster. I got to do that because the thing is, if I don't, I lose my train of thought. So when I'm doing the monologue, I got to really zero in and focus on what I'm saying, and I can't sit there and be losing my train of thought. So yeah, 1.5x. So what's going on, Luis? About to close the stream in, I don't know, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. What's going on? Do I rock with Fresh and Fit? I respect their hard work. They work real hard. Myron and Fresh. I respect that they're exceptional businessmen. There's a bunch of things I respect about them, but does it necessarily mean I like them? No, not really. But it is what it is. You're not going to get along with every person in the manosphere. But here's the thing. I said this 24 hours ago, and I'll say it again. I'm never going to, just because I don't like a certain content creator, I'm not telling you guys, my subs in the chat, to not go watch them. That's not what I'm saying. Go do whatever you want. You're always welcome over here. Listen to whoever you want to listen to. You're going to respect different content creators for different reasons, and that's okay. So I'm not over here like some people that try to pit this content creator against this one, and in order to manipulate my subs into supporting me more. No, I don't think like that. That's not my style. That's not what I do. You guys are going to support whoever you want to support. You guys are going to support whoever you want to support anyways. So yeah. Hey man, hit me up on Instagram, Luis. I've known the guy for a long period of time. But yeah, I've been talking for 3 hours, so I got to end the stream. Hit me up over there on Instagram. I haven't been to I don't hop over there on Instagram too much, but hit me up. Hit me up and we can see what's up. But hey, I hope you guys enjoy it. Time to end the stream. So until next time, peace out. Much blessings.